Why hello everyone, I'd like to welcome you back to another episode of Background Historian. If you've been enjoying our daily episodes, please subscribe, like and comment on my videos. Tonight we'll be diving into one of the biggest polytheistic religions in the world, Hinduism. We will take a walk through the Indian subcontinent and discover Hinduism spread across the map. Relax, grab a snack, and buckle up. Let's begin. Part 1, Origins, the Indus Valley Civilization and the Earliest Roots of Hinduism. Before the temples, before the hymns of the Vedas were ever recited, before Sanskrit itself took shape, there was a vast and thriving civilization spread across the northwestern plains of the Indian subcontinent. Long before the name Hinduism existed, the land that would later cradle this faith was home to complex societies whose religious ideas, symbols, and rituals would plant seeds for what would become one of the world's most enduring spiritual traditions. This first chapter takes us back over 4,500 years, to a time when the Indus River and its tributaries nourished a flourishing culture known today as the Indus Valley Civilization or the Harappan Civilization. This is where our journey begins. 1. The landscape of the ancient Indus. To understand the earliest roots of Hinduism, we must picture the land itself. Imagine a landscape stretching from what is now northeastern Afghanistan, across Pakistan, and into northwestern India. The Indus River, emerging from the icy Himalayas, carved its way through this region, fed by seasonal monsoons and glacial meltwater. It was joined by tributaries like the Ravi, Beas, Chenab, Sutlej, and Jhelum, rivers whose banks would give rise to some of the earliest urban centers in human history. The Indus Valley was lush in places, arid in others, but always rich in fertile floodplains. Seasonal rhythms dictated life. Sowing before the monsoon, harvesting afterward, storing grain in anticipation of the dry season. This predictable cycle nurtured stability, and stability allowed for culture, religion, and art to grow. 2. The people and their cities. The Harappan people, as we call them, lived in remarkably well-planned cities. The first of these to be excavated by modern archaeologists was Harappa in present-day Pakistan, followed by Mohenjo-Daro further south. But hundreds of sites have since been identified, some large, others small villages or trade posts. What's astonishing is the level of sophistication. Streets laid out in grid patterns, suggesting advanced civic planning. Brick houses, many with multiple rooms and private bathing areas. Sophisticated drainage systems, covered sewers, brick-lined channels, that were more advanced than many later civilizations. Massive granaries for storing surplus grain. Central citadels that may have held administrative or ritual significance. The Harappans were traders, artisans, farmers, and likely seafarers. Their trade network reached far, into Mesopotamia, Central Asia, and perhaps even farther. 3. Religion in the Indus Valley. While the written script of the Indus Valley remains undeciphered, we can still glean much about their beliefs from artifacts, architecture, and iconography. These glimpses hint at ideas that would later echo through Hinduism. The Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro. One of the most famous structures is the so-called Great Bath, a large, watertight tank surrounded by colonnades. It suggests ritual bathing or purification, a practice that has deep continuity in later Hindu traditions, especially in the significance of sacred rivers like the Ganges. Seals and figurines. Thousands of small carved seals have been found, often depicting animals, human figures, and enigmatic symbols. Among them are the Pashupati seal, a figure seated cross-legged, surrounded by animals, wearing a headdress with horns. Some scholars see a protoform of Shiva as lord of animals, Pashupati, a deity who in later Hinduism is linked to asceticism, yoga, and the natural world. Fertility figurines, terracotta statuettes of women with exaggerated hips and breasts, often interpreted as representations of a mother goddess, a symbol of fertility, earth, and abundance. Such imagery finds echoes in later worship of goddesses like Devi, Parvati, and Shakti. Animal symbolism. Many seals depict animals, bulls, elephants, tigers, rhinoceroses, sometimes in composite or mythical forms. This fascination with animals parallels Hinduism's deep symbolic relationship with the animal kingdom, where creatures are often associated with particular deities. 4. Early ritual practices. Without deciphered texts, we cannot know for certain the prayers or myths of the Harappans, but archaeological evidence suggests fire altars in some settlements, hinting at ritual offerings. Use of amulets and beads, possibly for protection or spiritual power. Importance of water in ritual, seen in bathing areas and wells. Later Hinduism retains all three elements: fire offerings, yajna, protective charms, and sacred water rites. 5. Continuity and debate. Scholars have long debated the relationship between the Indus Valley civilization and later Hinduism. Some see direct cultural continuity. Sacred symbols like the swastika, which appears on Harappan seals, persist in Hindu iconography as a sign of auspiciousness. The yogic-looking figure on the Pashupati seal hints at early meditative practices. The reverence for bulls parallels the later worship of Nandi, Shiva's sacred mount. Others caution that the arrival of Indo-Aryan-speaking peoples around 1500 BCE brought significant new religious ideas, blending with older Harappan traditions to create what we now call Hinduism. The truth may be a fusion, where the religious soil of the Indus Valley was enriched by new Vedic hymns, rituals, and cosmologies. 6. Society and spiritual worldview. While we cannot reconstruct Harappan theology, their urban design hints at a society with order and regulation, suggesting religious or civic authorities who valued harmony. A possible cosmic symbolism in city layouts, grid plans may have reflected spiritual order mirroring the universe. Integration of daily life and ritual, where bathing, feasting, and perhaps music or dance had sacred dimensions. Later Hinduism would share this seamless blend, where the divine is not separate from the everyday but present in all aspects of life. 7. Sacred geography begins. The rivers of the Indus and its tributaries were more than lifelines, they were probably sacred entities, much as the Ganges would become in later Hindu tradition. To live beside a river was to live in the embrace of a deity, to bathe was to purify body and soul, and to watch the monsoon rains was to witness a divine cycle. This deep reverence for the natural world, rivers, mountains, trees, would remain one of Hinduism's enduring qualities. 8. Decline of the Indus Valley civilization. Around 1900 BCE, signs of decline appeared. Urban centers were abandoned or shrank. Long-distance trade diminished. Some rivers changed course or dried up, disrupting agriculture. Climate change and overuse of land may have played a role. The decline was gradual, not catastrophic. Many Harappans migrated eastward, blending with other cultures. Their rituals, symbols, and possibly their deities traveled with them, becoming threads in the larger tapestry of Indian religious life. 9. The stage is set for the Vedic Age. By 1500 BCE, the stage was set for new arrivals, the Indo-Aryans, bringing with them Sanskrit hymns, fire rituals, and a pantheon of sky gods. But they did not enter an empty land, they encountered the descendants of the Harappans, whose agricultural ways, sacred symbols, and goddess traditions would mingle with their own. The fusion of these worlds, urban and pastoral, goddess-centered and sky god-centered, would give birth to something unique, the earliest recognizable form of Hindu tradition. Closing thoughts for Part 1. In this first part, we have not yet met the Vedas, Krishna, or Rama. We have not yet seen temples rise or heard the philosophical debates of sages. But we have seen the soil in which these would grow. The Harappans lived in harmony with their rivers, honored fertility and strength, and wove ritual into daily life. Though separated from us by thousands of years, they left an imprint on the spiritual DNA of the subcontinent. As we move to Part 2, we will watch as the Indo-Aryan migrations unfold, the Vedic hymns are composed, and a new religious vision takes shape. One that will eventually intertwine with the ancient roots we have just explored. Part 2, the Vedic Age. dawn of the hymns, rituals, and sacred order. In the centuries following the decline of the Indus Valley civilization, the Indian subcontinent experienced profound change. Around 1500 BCE, new groups, speaking early forms of Indo-Aryan languages, migrated into the region. They brought with them not only their herds and chariots but also their songs, their rituals, and a deep reverence for the spoken word as a sacred force. The blending of these newcomers' traditions with the surviving cultural patterns of the Harappan world gave rise to what historians call the Vedic Age. This era is named for the Vedas, the oldest scriptures of Hinduism and among the oldest surviving sacred texts in the world. In this part, we will explore how these hymns were composed, how the society of the Vedic peoples functioned, and how the religious ideas of the time formed the foundations of Hindu philosophy, ritual, and worldview. 1. The arrival of the Indo-Aryans. The Indo-Aryans were part of a broader family of peoples known to linguists as Indo-Europeans, who spread over vast distances from Europe to Central and South Asia. Their arrival in the subcontinent was not a sudden invasion but rather a gradual migration over centuries. They were pastoralists, people whose lives centered on herding cattle, sheep, and horses. Cattle were not merely food sources, they were symbols of wealth, social status, and spiritual blessing. In their worldview, the protection and prosperity of herds were bound up with divine favor. These people spoke an early form of Sanskrit, and their culture placed enormous value on oral tradition. For them, the power of the spoken word was magical. Correctly pronounced hymns were thought to sustain the cosmic order itself. 2. The Vedas, pillars of sacred knowledge. The word Veda comes from the Sanskrit root vid, meaning to know. To the Vedic people, the Vedas were not man-made works but eternal truths heard, Shruti, by ancient seers, rishis, in states of heightened awareness. The 4 Vedas are: Rigveda, the oldest and most important, containing over 1,000 hymns to deities, forces of nature, and cosmic principles. Samaveda, a collection of melodies and chants used in rituals. Yajurveda, a manual for performing sacrifices, with prose instructions. Atharvaveda, a diverse collection of spells, prayers, and philosophical hymns. These were transmitted orally for centuries before ever being written down, preserved with astonishing precision through memorization techniques. 3. The gods of the Vedic pantheon. Vedic religion was polytheistic, yet not in the sense of fixed, distinct gods as in later temple Hinduism. The gods, devas, of the Vedas often represented aspects of the natural world, moral order, and cosmic forces. Key figures included Indra, king of the gods, wielder of the thunderbolt, associated with storms, rain, and victory in battle. Indra was a heroic figure who slayed the serpent Vritra, releasing the rivers. Agni, the god of fire, both physical and sacrificial. Agni was the messenger between humans and the gods, carrying offerings through smoke and flame. Varuna, guardian of cosmic order, Rita, associated with the waters and moral law. Soma, both a god and a sacred drink pressed from a mysterious plant, associated with divine inspiration and immortality. Surya, Ushas, Vayu, solar and atmospheric deities, each representing aspects of light, dawn, and wind. Notably, some goddesses appear too, like Prithvi, earth, and Aditi, mother of the gods, hinting at continuity with older fertility traditions. 4. The concept of Rita, cosmic order. Central to Vedic thought was the concept of Rita, the underlying order of the universe. Rita governed the seasons, the movement of the sun, the cycles of life, and the moral law. It was upheld by the gods but also by human actions, especially sacrifice. If Rita was disturbed, by neglecting rituals, by moral failings, chaos could enter the world. Maintaining Rita was thus both a spiritual and practical duty. 5. Ritual sacrifice, the yajna. The heart of Vedic religion was the yajna, or fire sacrifice. This was not merely an offering to please the gods, it was a way of sustaining the very fabric of reality. Sacrifices were performed by priests, Brahmins, who knew the proper chants and procedures. Offerings might include ghee, clarified butter, grains, soma juice. Animal sacrifice, in some cases, especially horses or goats. The correct recitation of mantras was essential. The belief was that sound itself, when correctly uttered, had power to affect the cosmic order. 6. Society in the Vedic Age, Varna and role. Vedic society was organized into social groupings, later formalized as the Varna system. Brahmins, priests and keepers of sacred knowledge. Kshatriyas, warriors and rulers, responsible for protection and governance. Vaishyas, merchants, farmers, and herders. Shudras, servants and laborers. This division was not yet as rigid as in later centuries, but the seeds of the caste system were already sown. The household was patriarchal, but women in early Vedic society appear to have had more freedom than in later periods. Some were composers of hymns, known as rishikas, whose verses are preserved in the Rigveda. 7. The importance of cattle and horses. Cattle were wealth, livelihood, and sacred trust. Many Rigvedic hymns pray for the prosperity of herds. The horse was another symbol of prestige and power, central to the Ashvamedha, a royal horse sacrifice asserting sovereignty. These animals were tied to cosmology. Cows symbolized abundance and nourishment, horses represented energy and motion, linking earthly power to divine favor. 8. From nature worship to abstract thought. Though much of the Rigveda focuses on natural deities, there are hints of more abstract, philosophical inquiry. Hymns that speak of the creation of the universe in mysterious, questioning tones. The famous Nasadiya Sukta, which wonders whether even the gods know the origin of all things. The recognition that different deities might be aspects of one underlying reality, an idea that will later evolve into Brahman, the ultimate reality. 9. Early connections to later Hinduism. Many core features of later Hinduism have Vedic roots. The sacredness of the Ganges and other rivers. The use of mantras in ritual and meditation. Reverence for fire as a divine messenger. The intertwining of moral duty and cosmic balance. Even though the Vedic gods differ from many popular Hindu deities today, the structure of thought, the linking of human action, ritual, and cosmic order remains a common thread. 10. Transition toward the later Vedic period. By around 1000 BCE, the Vedic peoples had moved eastward into the fertile Gangetic plain. Agriculture expanded, iron tools were introduced, and permanent settlements grew. Rituals became more elaborate, and priestly authority increased. This later Vedic period would see the beginnings of speculative philosophy, questions about the self, Atman, the cycle of rebirth, samsara, and the possibility of liberation, moksha. Closing thoughts for Part 2. In the Vedic age, we see the emergence of sacred sound as a creative force, the ritual fire as a link between realms, and a moral cosmic order that ties the fate of the world to human action. While the gods of this time may seem distant from modern temples, their hymns still echo in Hindu rites today. In Part 3, we will enter the later Vedic and Upanishadic period, where ritual dominance begins to give way to deep philosophical reflection, and Hindu thought takes some of its most enduring forms. Part 4, the Epic Age, Stories, Duty, and the Seeds of Devotion. Between roughly 500 BCE and 200 CE, the Indian subcontinent entered what is often called the Epic Age, an era in which oral traditions crystallized into monumental literary works, and religion took on a more public, accessible, and emotionally resonant form. Two works dominate this age: the Mahabharata, the Ramayana. These epics are not simply stories. They are vast cultural encyclopedias, blending history, mythology, philosophy, law, geography, and moral teaching. They were composed over centuries, shaped by countless storytellers, and became a living inheritance for Hinduism. 1. The social and political backdrop. By the time the epics took shape, the Gangetic plain was dotted with Mahajanapadas, large kingdoms and republics. New cities arose along trade routes, attracting merchants, artisans, and scholars. political intrigue, warfare, and alliances were common. Religiously, the Vedic tradition was still strong, but new spiritual currents, including Buddhism and Jainism, were spreading. The epics absorbed and responded to these influences, often reaffirming the role of dharma, moral and social duty, within a Hindu framework. 2. The Mahabharata, what is found here. At nearly 100,000 verses, the Mahabharata is the longest epic in world literature. Attributed to the sage Vyasa, it likely reached its final form between 400 BCE and 400 CE, though its core stories are much older. The central narrative concerns the rivalry between two sets of royal cousins. The Pandavas, 5 brothers embodying virtues like courage, righteousness, and devotion. The Kauravas, 100 brothers led by the ambitious Duryodhana. Their conflict over the throne of Hastinapura culminates in the devastating Kurukshetra war. 3. Layers of the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is more than a war story. It is a treatise on dharma, exploring duty at every level, from kings to commoners. A manual of statecraft, discussing diplomacy, justice, and governance. A spiritual guide, culminating in the Bhagavad Gita, one of Hinduism's most revered scriptures. Its famous saying captures its scope. What is found here may be found elsewhere, what is not here is found nowhere. 4. The Bhagavad Gita, Song of the Lord. The Bhagavad Gita, embedded in the Mahabharata, is a dialogue between Prince Arjuna and his charioteer, Krishna, on the eve of battle. Faced with fighting his own kin, Arjuna is overcome with despair. Krishna responds by teaching selfless action, karma yoga, devotion to God, bhakti yoga, discipline of knowledge and meditation, jnana yoga. The Gita reframes the Upanishadic search for liberation in a more accessible and active form, one that harmonizes worldly duty with spiritual realization. 5. The Ramayana, the journey of Rama. If the Mahabharata is a vast, many-sided mirror of life, the Ramayana is a more focused and moral tale. Traditionally attributed to the sage Valmiki, it tells the story of Rama, Prince of Ayodhya, and his quest to rescue his wife, Sita, from the demon king Ravana. 6. The themes of the Ramayana. The Ramayana champions Dharma as personal integrity. Rama upholds his duty even at great personal cost. Marital devotion. Sita's loyalty to Rama becomes an ideal. Loyal friendship. Hanuman's service to Rama exemplifies absolute dedication. The battle between good and evil, symbolized in the war between Rama and Ravana. Like the Mahabharata, the Ramayana blends adventure with moral instruction, but it is more didactic and idealized in tone. 7. Oral tradition and public culture. For centuries, these epics were transmitted orally by bards, priests, and storytellers. Public recitations could last days, often accompanied by music, dance, and dramatic enactments. This made the moral and spiritual teachings of Hinduism accessible to all classes, not just the educated elite. 8. The concept of dharma in the epics. In the Vedic period, dharma referred mainly to ritual duty. In the epics, it broadens into duty to family and society, moral integrity in complex situations, the idea that no choice is without cost, but one must choose the path most aligned with righteousness. 9. Gods as characters. While the Vedas focus on deities like Indra, Agni, and Varuna, the epics elevate Vishnu, through avatars like Rama and Krishna, and Shiva as central figures. This shift signals the growing importance of bhakti, personal devotion, in Hindu spirituality. 10. Epic geography. Both the Mahabharata and Ramayana map India's sacred geography. Rivers, forests, mountains, and cities are named in ways that link the land to divine history. Pilgrimage, Tirtha Yatra, became a way to connect physically with the epic narratives. 11. Philosophical integration. The epics weave together Vedic ritualism, Upanishadic philosophy, folk tales and local legends, moral parables, they unify India's diverse traditions into a shared cultural framework. 12. Influence beyond Hinduism. Buddhists, Jains, and later Sikh storytellers adapted epic episodes to fit their own teachings. In Southeast Asia, the Ramayana inspired classical dance, shadow puppet theater, and temple art, from Bali to Thailand. 13. Preservation and variation. There is no single, fixed text of either epic. Regional versions, in Sanskrit and in vernacular languages, vary in length, detail, and emphasis. Tulsidas' 16th-century Ramcharitmanas, for example, recast the Ramayana in devotional Hindi poetry, shaping North Indian spirituality for centuries. 14. The emotional shift toward bhakti. The epics bridge the gap between ritual religion and emotional devotion. Characters like Krishna in the Gita or Hanuman in the Ramayana inspire love, loyalty, and surrender, feelings that become central in later Hinduism. 15. Closing reflections for Part 4. The epic age gave Hinduism its narrative soul. Through the Mahabharata and Ramayana, abstract ideas like dharma, karma, and moksha came alive in flesh and blood characters facing relatable dilemmas. These stories still shape Indian ethics, politics, and everyday life. In Part 5, we will explore the age of dharma and law codes, when the principles found in the epics were systematized into social and legal frameworks, notably in the Dharmashastras and Manusmriti. Part 5, the Age of Dharma and the Shaping of Society. As the epic narratives of the Mahabharata and Ramayana spread across the subcontinent, their moral lessons began to crystallize into written codes. These texts didn't just tell stories, they provided the framework for living, defining the duties of individuals, the roles of communities, and the obligations of rulers. This was the era of the Dharmashastras, Sanskrit treatises that explained the principles of dharma in practical, everyday terms. The most famous among them is the Manusmriti, Laws of Manu. But it was part of a much broader tradition. 1. Historical context, from oral wisdom to written law. The centuries following the composition of the epics, roughly 200 BCE to 200 CE, were a time of great political and cultural consolidation in India. The Maurya Empire had risen and fallen, leaving behind a precedent for centralized governance. The Shunga and Satavahana dynasties ruled in different regions, while numerous smaller kingdoms thrived. Trade routes connected India to Rome, Central Asia, and Southeast Asia, bringing wealth and new cultural influences. With urban centers growing and political power shifting, society required more standardized guidelines for behavior, governance, and justice. 2. What are the Dharmashastras? The Dharmashastras are Sanskrit texts that compile and organize rules about social duties, varna and ashrama system, ritual obligations, civil and criminal law, inheritance, marriage, and property, purity and pollution rules, penalties for misconduct. They built on earlier Dharmasutras, terse, aphoristic manuals, but expanded them into prose and verse, making them easier to memorize and transmit. 3. The Varna system in law codes. The Dharmashastras elaborate on the 4 Varna, broad social classes: Brahmins, priests, scholars, and teachers; Kshatriyas, warriors and rulers; Vaishyas, merchants and agriculturalists; Shudras, service providers and laborers. In theory, each Varna had its own set of duties, svadharma, and society functioned best when each fulfilled its role. In practice, the system was fluid in earlier centuries but hardened over time, giving rise to more rigid caste distinctions. 4. The 4 ashramas, stages of life. The law codes also outlined 4 ashramas, stages of life. Brahmacharya, student stage, devoted to study and discipline. Grihastha, householder stage, focused on family, work, and community service. Vanaprastha, forest dweller stage, when one withdraws from worldly life to reflect. Sannyasa, renunciation stage, seeking liberation, moksha. This structure balanced worldly engagement with spiritual progress. 5. The Manusmriti, Laws of Manu. The Manusmriti is the most famous Dharmashastra, traditionally ascribed to the legendary lawgiver Manu. Likely compiled between 200 BCE and 200 CE, it consists of over 2,600 verses. It covers cosmology, explaining the divine origin of the universe and social order. Ritual practices, from birth to death. Law and justice, including punishments, which varied by social class. King's duties, how a ruler should protect and guide his people. While revered in many circles, the Manusmriti has also been critiqued, both historically and in modern times, for its hierarchical vision of society. 6. The role of the king, Dharma as governance. In the Dharmashastras, the king, Rajan, was the upholder of Dharma on earth. His duties included enforcing law without favoritism, protecting the weak, supporting religious life, maintaining order and prosperity. Kings were advised to consult Brahmin scholars, but also to be pragmatic. A ruler who ignored changing realities risked unrest. 7. Law and morality, not just punishment. The Dharmashastras emphasized that law was not merely about punishing crime. It was about preventing social decay, encouraging virtuous behavior, keeping the cosmic order, Rita, intact. Thus, even small daily acts, kindness, honesty, charity, were considered part of maintaining Dharma. 8. Women and Dharma. The law codes reflect the patriarchal norms of their time. Women were often advised to remain under the guardianship of father, husband, or son. At the same time, the texts praised women as bearers of culture, keepers of the home's sanctity, and participants in religious rites. It's important to note that regional variation often gave women greater autonomy than the law codes suggest, especially in southern and tribal societies. 9. Crime, justice, and penalties. The Dharmashastras categorize offenses as against the person, violence, theft; against ritual purity, forbidden foods, improper contact; against the state, treason, bribery. Punishments included fines, public shaming, and, in severe cases, corporal penalties. The king's role was to ensure penalties were proportionate and aimed at restoring harmony. 10. Dharma as adaptable law. While the law codes appear rigid, they allowed for deshakalapatra, adaptation according to place, time, and circumstance. What was proper in one region or era might differ in another. This flexibility helped Hindu law survive for centuries, evolving with new political realities. 11. Intersection with other traditions. The Dharmashastras coexisted with Buddhist Vinaya codes for monastic discipline. Jain law focused on nonviolence. Local customs, deshachara, which could take precedence if widely followed. This created a pluralistic legal culture where royal courts balanced multiple systems. 12. Legacy of the Dharmashastras. For over a millennium, the Dharmashastras guided kings, priests, and communities. Even under later Islamic and colonial rule, they influenced personal law for Hindus. In modern India, while the constitution replaced religious law in state matters, aspects of the Dharmashastra tradition survive in Hindu personal law covering marriage, inheritance, and adoption. 13. The spiritual dimension of law. In Hindu thought, law was never entirely secular. To break Dharma was not just to commit a crime, it was to disturb the cosmic balance. Conversely, to follow Dharma was to align oneself with truth and order, advancing toward liberation. 14. From Dharma to Bhakti, Seeds of Change. Even as law codes were written, a quieter spiritual revolution was beginning. The emphasis on devotion, bhakti, hinted at in the epics, was about to flourish, making religion more personal and emotionally rich. This shift would redefine Hinduism's center of gravity in the coming centuries. 15. Closing reflections for Part 5. The age of Dharma and law codes took the moral ideals of the epics and anchored them in rules for society. It gave Hinduism a stable social foundation but also set the stage for debates and reforms that continue to this day. In Part 6, we will explore the rise of the Bhakti movement's early roots, when poets, saints, and mystics began to focus not on ritual precision or legal codes, but on direct love for the divine. Part 6, The Dawn of Bhakti, Seeds of Devotion in Hinduism. By the time the Dharma-shastras had been codified and kings across the subcontinent were ruling according to their principles, a new spiritual current began to ripple through India. This was bhakti, not a legal code or ritual obligation, but a direct, emotional, and deeply personal relationship between the devotee and the divine. 1. What is bhakti? The word bhakti comes from the Sanskrit root bhaj, meaning to share or to partake in. In its deepest sense, bhakti is participation in the divine, a merging of the heart with God. It is devotion that transcends formal ritual. It is love that does not demand status or birth. It is direct relationship without priestly mediation. Bhakti would not replace the established Vedic rituals or the social structures of the Dharma-shastras, but it would open new paths to spiritual fulfillment for millions who might otherwise have felt distant from the religious elite. 2. The cultural soil in which bhakti grew. Bhakti did not appear in a vacuum. Its seeds were planted in several currents of earlier Indian thought. Vedic hymns, the Rigveda contains personal prayers to gods like Agni and Indra, in which devotion is already heartfelt, not purely transactional. Upanishads, these spoke of the ultimate reality, Brahman, and the soul's union with it, inspiring personal spiritual questing. The epics, the Ramayana and Mahabharata, particularly the Bhagavad Gita, made love for God a central theme. Local folk traditions, village worship of local deities often involved song, dance, and intimate expressions of devotion. Influence of other religions, Buddhism and Jainism encouraged direct spiritual effort and ethical living, which blended naturally with bhakti ideals. 3. The early bhakti in the epics. The Bhagavad Gita, part of the Mahabharata, is perhaps the earliest and most influential bhakti text. In it, Krishna tells Arjuna, "Abandon all varieties of dharma and simply surrender unto me. I shall deliver you from all sinful reactions. Do not fear." This is the core bhakti promise, divine grace in response to wholehearted surrender. In the Ramayana, devotion to Rama is embodied in Hanuman, whose absolute loyalty and service became a model for future bhakti saints. 4. The humanization of the divine. Bhakti flourished because it allowed people to see God in relatable forms. As Rama, the perfect king and compassionate protector. As Krishna, the playful cowherd and wise teacher. As Devi, the nurturing mother or fierce protector. As Shiva, the ascetic yet benevolent lord. This shift from an abstract cosmic order to personal gods made spirituality accessible. 5. The role of poetry and music. Bhakti was expressed through kirtan, communal singing, bhajans, devotional songs, and epic recitations. The emphasis was on emotion over technical precision. Songs could be lullabies to Krishna, praise poems to Shiva, long narrative ballads recounting a deity's deeds. Poetry allowed illiterate communities to participate in worship fully. Devotion was felt, not just recited. 6. Democratization of spirituality. One of Bhakti's revolutionary aspects was its openness. It welcomed women, the poor, and those from lower castes. It valued sincerity over ritual purity. It often challenged rigid social norms. Although resistance from orthodox circles existed, Bhakti steadily gained ground as a unifying spiritual force. 7. Early Bhakti saints. While the fully developed Bhakti movement would blossom centuries later, especially between the 7th and 17th centuries, early saints set the tone. Sage Valmiki, traditionally credited with the Ramayana, often depicted as a reformed bandit turned saint. Vyasa, compiler of the Mahabharata and Puranas, shaping the devotional literature. Alvars and Nayanmars, in Tamil Nadu, from around 6th century CE, poet saints who composed devotional hymns to Vishnu and Shiva. 8. The Bhakti Path versus Ritualism. Bhakti did not necessarily reject rituals, temples, festivals, and offerings still mattered, but it changed the emphasis. Ritual without love was seen as empty. Love without elaborate ritual was seen as powerful. The relationship with God was often described in human emotional terms, as a lover, a child, a friend, or a master. 9. The Purana literature and Bhakti. From about 300 CE onwards, the Puranas became the main vessels of Hindu storytelling. They were accessible, written in simple Sanskrit, and filled with inspiring narratives. Vishnu Purana, Bhagavata Purana, celebrated the avatars of Vishnu, especially Krishna. Shiva Purana, Linga Purana, devoted to Shiva's glories. Devi Bhagavata Purana, centered on the goddess in her many forms. These texts blended theology with moral lessons, spreading bhakti ideals across India. 10. Temples as centers of devotion. Bhakti encouraged the building of magnificent temples not just as ritual spaces, but as social hubs. Temples organized festivals. They housed musicians and poets. They distributed food to pilgrims. The temple was no longer just a place of sacrifice, it became a home for God where devotees could visit daily. 11. Bhakti and liberation, moksha. In earlier Vedic thought, liberation was often pursued through sacrificial rites, ascetic withdrawal, knowledge, jnana. Bhakti offered a third way. Surrender to God's will. Trust in divine grace. Serve selflessly. For many, this path was more emotionally fulfilling and socially inclusive. 12. Regional variations. Even in its early stages, Bhakti took distinct forms. Vaishnavism, devotion to Vishnu, Krishna, Rama. Shaivism, devotion to Shiva. Shaktism, devotion to the goddess. Different regions celebrated different aspects of the divine, yet shared the Bhakti principle of loving surrender. 13. Bhakti's lasting emotional impact. Bhakti transformed Hindu spirituality into a more heart-centered practice. A farmer could sing to Krishna while working. A mother could see her child as a form of Ganesha. A wandering ascetic could chant Shiva's name as his only possession. This intimacy with God became the heartbeat of Hinduism for centuries. 14. The stage is set for expansion. By the early century CE, Bhakti was no longer just an undercurrent, it was becoming a movement. Saints would soon travel across kingdoms, singing and preaching to all. This would culminate in the great Bhakti waves that swept India from the south to the north, reshaping literature, music, and social life. 15. Closing reflections for Part 6. The dawn of Bhakti was like the first warm light before sunrise, gentle but transformative. It offered hope and belonging to those left out of the formal structures and gave Hinduism a flexible, compassionate face. In Part 7, we will explore the southern Bhakti saints and the Tamil Renaissance. When devotion in song and poetry exploded into a cultural revolution that would influence all of India. Part 7, Southern Bhakti Saints and the Tamil Renaissance. By the early centuries of the Common Era, devotion, Bhakti, had emerged as a quiet but steady undercurrent across the Indian subcontinent. Nowhere did it blossom with greater early intensity than in the far south, in the Tamil-speaking lands of present-day Tamil Nadu and parts of Andhra Pradesh and Kerala. This was the heartland of the early Bhakti Renaissance, where poet saints roamed, singing their love for God in the local tongue rather than in elite Sanskrit. Their songs were not distant theological treatises, they were cries of joy, longing, and surrender, alive with human emotion and vivid imagery. 1. The landscape of the Tamil South. Southern India during this period was home to several powerful dynasties. The Pallavas in the northeast, around Kanchipuram. The Pandyas in the south, around Madurai. The Cholas, later, from the 9th century onward, rising to dominance. The Cheras in the west, modern Kerala. This was a region of active maritime trade, with links to Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, and the Roman Empire, but also deeply rooted in its agricultural rhythms and local traditions. Religious life was woven into daily existence. Ancient temples to Murugan, Shiva, and Vishnu dotted the landscape. Village shrines to guardian deities stood at crossroads. Seasonal festivals marked the agricultural calendar. It was here that the seeds of a personal, emotional devotion were sown into fertile soil. 2. The two great streams, Alvars and Myanmars. The Southern Bhakti movement crystallized around two major groups of poet saints. The Alvars, those immersed in God. Devotees of Vishnu in his various forms, especially as Krishna and Rama. Traditionally numbered at 12 saints, active between roughly the 5th and 9th centuries CE. Composed hymns compiled in the Nalayira Divya Prabandham, 4,000 sacred compositions. Their works overflow with longing for union with Vishnu, often cast in the voice of a lover yearning for the beloved. The Myanmars, leaders, guides. Devotees of Shiva. Traditionally numbered at 63 saints, active between the 6th and 9th centuries CE. Composed the Tirumarai, a vast collection of Tamil hymns. Many were ascetics, temple priests, or householders who traveled, spreading Shiva devotion. Together, these saints wove a cultural tapestry that was devotional, literary, and socially transformative. 3. Bhakti in the vernacular. One of the most radical aspects of the Tamil Renaissance was language choice. The Vedas and many ritual texts were in Sanskrit, accessible primarily to Brahmins. The Alvars and Myanmars composed in Tamil, the language of the people. This shift democratized access to sacred expression. A farmer could hear a hymn at a temple festival and understand it completely. The experience of the divine was no longer mediated by an elite language, it spoke in the mother tongue. 4. Themes in Alvar poetry. Alvar hymns are rich with romantic yearning, often portraying the soul as a heroine pining for the divine hero. Playful devotion, Krishna's mischievous childhood pranks become metaphors for God's playful ways with devotees. Temple praise, many hymns are tied to specific shrines, turning geography into sacred memory. Egalitarian inclusivity, saints from various castes were accepted, from Brahmins to cowherds to fisherfolk. A notable figure is Undul, the only female Alvar. Her verses, like the Tirupavai, are sung to this day, especially during the Tamil month of Margadi. She envisioned herself as the bride of Vishnu, her poetry blending divine love with human intimacy. 5. Themes in Myanmar poetry. Myanmar hymns often praise Shiva's beauty, power, and cosmic dance. Express fierce loyalty, rejecting any other deity. Describe acts of service, such as cleaning temples, offering flowers, or feeding pilgrims. Criticize hypocrisy and caste arrogance. Saints like Apar, Sundarar, and Manikavakakar became icons of Shiva devotion. Their lives, often filled with trials, conversions, and miracles, were as inspirational as their songs. 6. Social impact. Bhakti in the Tamil South subtly eroded rigid caste boundaries. Saints from so-called low castes were venerated alongside Brahmin saints. Temples welcomed devotees from diverse backgrounds during festivals. The emphasis on love and surrender over birth and ritual purity reshaped community life. While caste hierarchy did not vanish, Bhakti opened spiritual spaces that were more inclusive than before. 7. Temple culture and patronage. As the Bhakti movement grew, kings and wealthy patrons sponsored the construction and expansion of temples. Large gopurams, gateway towers, rose above temple walls. Inner sanctums, garbhagriha, housed the main deity, but surrounding halls were built for music, dance, and public recitation. Temple art depicted stories from Bhakti poetry, making the walls a form of visual scripture. Temples became centers of art, music, education, and economy. 8. Performance and community. Bhakti was not just a private prayer, it was a public performance. Hymns were sung in processions during temple festivals. Devotees danced, carrying lamps and banners. Musical instruments like the mridangam, nadaswaram, and cymbals set the rhythm. These performances bonded communities and created a shared emotional memory. 9. Women in early Southern Bhakti. While most saints were men, figures like Undul and Karaikal Ammayar, a Nayanmar saint, stand out. Undul's poetry embodies divine bridal mysticism. Karaikal Ammayar is known for her ascetic devotion to Shiva, seeing herself as a ghoul mother in his cosmic dance. These women challenged social norms. Some renounced marriage, others redefined it through divine union. 10. Integration with local deities. Bhakti saints often absorbed local folk deities into the broader Hindu pantheon. A village goddess might be identified as an aspect of Parvati. A local hero could be linked to an avatar of Vishnu. This integration preserved local traditions while connecting them to pan-Indian theology. 11. Literary legacy. The Alvar and Nayanmar hymns were preserved by disciples and temple custodians. Over centuries, they were memorized and transmitted orally, written on palm leaves, compiled into sacred anthologies. Today, they remain central to Tamil Hindu worship, sung daily in temples and homes. 12. Influence beyond Tamil Nadu. The Tamil Bhakti model, local language, personal devotion, temple-centered culture, would later influence Kannada-speaking regions, inspiring the Virashaiva/Lingayat movement. Marathi-speaking lands, fueling Varkari devotion to Vithoba. Northern India, providing a template for later Bhakti poets like Tulsidas and Mirabai. 13. The emotional core. Perhaps the greatest gift of the Southern saints was their emotional authenticity. They showed that God could be loved like a child. God could be longed for like a distant lover. God could be served like a master. This emotional spectrum made devotion deeply human. 14. Preparing the ground for medieval Bhakti waves. By the 9th century, the Tamil Bhakti tradition had produced vast devotional literature, inspired monumental temple architecture, shaped communal religious life. It would merge with Sanskritic traditions, political power, and pilgrimage networks to create the pan-Indian Bhakti movement that would dominate medieval Hinduism. 15. Closing reflections for Part 7. The Southern Bhakti saints remind us that spiritual revolutions often begin in song. Their voices carried across centuries, speaking to farmers, kings, merchants, and children alike, each finding in those verses a mirror for their own love of the divine. In Part 8, we will journey into the rise of temple empires and the fusion of Bhakti with political power, when devotion became not only a personal calling, but also a tool for kingdom building and cultural unification. Part 8, The Rise of Temple Empires and the Political Power of Bhakti. By the 9th and 10th century CE, the Bhakti movement in southern India had matured into a force that was not only devotional and literary, but also political and monumental. Kings and dynasties began to see temples not just as sacred spaces, but as symbols of power, legitimacy, and cultural authority. The building of great temples, patronage of devotional poets, and the orchestration of massive festivals became tools through which rulers forged unity and loyalty among diverse populations. This era marks the beginning of what historians call the temple-state phenomenon, a unique fusion of religion, governance, and economics. 1. The political climate of the period. From the 9th century onward, the political map of southern India was shaped by three major dynasties. The Cholas, centered in the Kaveri River Delta. The Pandyas, with Madurai as their capital. The Cheras, in Kerala, controlling west coast trade routes. The Pallavas, who had earlier dominated the region and sponsored early temple art, were giving way to the Cholas as the preeminent power. In this competition for influence, temples became political statements. 2. The Cholas, masters of temple building. The Cholas, especially from the reign of Rajaraja Chola I, r. 985 to 1014 CE, onward, transformed temple construction into a state enterprise. Brihadiswarar Temple, Tanjavur. Commissioned by Rajaraja Chola I. Dedicated to Shiva. Features a towering Vimana, temple tower, over 60 meters high, entirely built of granite, an engineering marvel of its age. Its inscriptions record not just religious dedications, but also land grants, tax regulations, and lists of temple staff. This temple functioned as a spiritual center, daily worship, festivals, and processions. An administrative hub, scribes recorded economic transactions on temple walls. An economic powerhouse, managing vast lands, employing artisans, and facilitating trade. 3. Temples as economic engines. Large temples in this period were far more than places for prayer. Agricultural control, temples owned land, collected rents, and managed irrigation systems. Employment hubs, priests, cooks, guards, musicians, dancers, sculptors, and washermen all worked in service to the temple. Storage and redistribution centers, surpluses from agricultural estates could be stored and redistributed during festivals or famines. In essence, the temple was the heartbeat of the medieval South Indian economy. 4. The role of bhakti in political legitimacy. Rulers increasingly tied their authority to divine sanction. A king might present himself as a servant of the temple deity. Festivals celebrating the deity's marriage or victory often paralleled royal ceremonies, blurring lines between divine and royal power. Victories in battle were attributed to the blessings of a temple's presiding god or goddess. Through this, bhakti was no longer just a matter of personal devotion, it became a shared political language. 5. The integration of Alvar and Nayanmar traditions. The literary legacies of the Alvars, Vaishnavite, and Nayanmars, Shaivite, were institutionalized into temple worship. Recitation halls were built for singing hymns. Royal patronage ensured that certain temple rituals followed the sequences described in the saints' works. Saints were themselves enshrined as icons, their images carried in processions alongside those of the gods. This formalized the once grassroots bhakti movement into the mainstream religious establishment. 6. Expanding the sacred geography. Dynasties used temple construction to anchor their rule. Conquering a new region often meant renovating or expanding a key temple there. Important pilgrimage centers were linked into a network, reinforcing a sense of shared sacred space across vast territories. Maritime temples, especially along the Coromandel coast, also served as symbols of protection for overseas trade. 7. Women and royal patronage. Interestingly, royal women played an active role in temple patronage. Queens endowed temples with jewelry, land, and ceremonial objects. Some inscriptions mention female donors funding repairs or commissioning sculptures. In certain temples, goddesses received almost equal prominence to male deities, a reflection of the deep cultural veneration of Shakti. 8. The Pandya contribution. While the Cholas are most famous for monumental architecture, the Pandyas also fostered bhakti culture. Madurai's Meenakshi temple flourished under their patronage. Their support of Tamil literature ensured that devotional poetry remained central in public life. The Pandya court welcomed both Shaivite and Vaishnavite traditions, creating a more pluralistic devotional environment. 9. Kerala and the Chera legacy. In the Chera kingdom, present-day Kerala, temples often followed a distinct architectural style, using sloped roofs adapted to heavy monsoons. The Bhakti movement here blended with Kerala's rich tradition of dance and performance, giving rise to art forms like Kathakali, later, and Krishnatam. Kerala's temples were also deeply connected to the region's maritime trade wealth. 10. Architecture as theology. Temple design in this era was not just aesthetic, it was symbolic theology in stone. The temple layout mirrored the cosmic order, from the earthly realm at the outer walls to the divine core at the sanctum. Carvings depicted Puranic stories, saints' lives, and even everyday village scenes, blending sacred and secular. Towers rising skyward symbolized the ascent of the soul toward the divine. 11. The festival calendar and civic life. Temple festivals in this period were elaborate. Processions of deities on chariots. Nighttime lamp parades through city streets. Public recitation of epics and devotional poetry. Ritual bathing of the deity in sacred tanks. These festivals strengthened community bonds, served as opportunities for trade and cultural exchange, reinforced the ruler's image as the protector and benefactor of religion. 12. Music and dance as offerings. Bhakti in the Temple Empire era was sensory and immersive. Music ensembles, Nadaswaram, Mridangam, accompanied rituals. Temple dancers, Devadasis, performed to narrate sacred stories. Chanting of Vedic hymns was often paired with the singing of Tamil Bhakti verses, symbolizing the union of Sanskritic and regional traditions. 13. The spread beyond South India. By the 11th and 12th centuries, the temple building and Bhakti culture of the south began influencing the Deccan, present-day Karnataka and Telangana. Orissa, now Odisha, where the great Jagannath temple at Puri emerged as a major Vaishnavite center. Parts of Southeast Asia, Chola naval expeditions carried Hindu iconography and rituals to Sri Lanka, Indonesia, and beyond. 14. The Chola maritime reach. The Chola dynasty's overseas influence was remarkable. Expeditions reached as far as Sumatra and the Malay Peninsula. Temples dedicated to Hindu deities appeared in port cities abroad. The intertwining of trade, military power, and Bhakti created a far-reaching cultural footprint. 15. Temples as record keepers. Temple inscriptions from this period are a historian's treasure. They record land donations, the names of kings, and details of festivals. Some include lists of temple musicians, cooks, and even flower suppliers. They preserve linguistic history, showing the evolution of Tamil, Sanskrit, and Prakrit. 16. The synthesis of devotion and administration. This fusion of bhakti and governance created a mutually reinforcing cycle. The king patronized the temple. The temple legitimized the king. The people experienced both as protectors and providers. 17. Challenges and conflicts. The temple empire model was not without tension. Rival sects, Shaivite versus Vaishnavite, sometimes competed for royal favor. Temple wealth could make them targets for raids. Some critics, even within Bhakti circles, warned against excessive materialism creeping into spiritual life. 18. Preparing for the next era. As we move toward the later medieval period, this temple-state model would face the arrival of new religious influences, especially from the north. Shifts in trade routes. Internal political rivalries. Yet the foundations laid in this era, of Bhakti as both a personal and political force, would endure. 19. Closing reflections for Part 8. This was the age when stone sang. Temples rose like mountains, covered in hymns carved in granite. Devotion was not confined to a shrine's inner sanctum, it was etched into the civic, economic, and political life of the land. The deity's procession mirrored the king's parade, the king's generosity mirrored the god's grace. Bhakti had begun as a whisper of personal love. Now it thundered across empires. In Part 9, we will explore the medieval northern expansion of Bhakti, when devotion swept across the Ganges plains, creating saints, poets, and reformers who carried the flame lit in the south into the heart of India. Part 9, the Northern Bhakti Renaissance, Saints, Poets, and the Democratization of Devotion. By the 13th and 14th centuries, the devotional revolution that had begun centuries earlier in the Tamil-speaking south had moved steadily northward. Its ideas, songs, and practices traveled through trade routes, pilgrim paths, and wandering mendicants. As these devotional currents met the cultural and political realities of northern India, they transformed, adapting to new languages, social structures, and spiritual needs. In this era, Bhakti became a bridge, linking the deeply rooted Sanskritic tradition with emerging vernacular cultures, connecting rural villagers with royal courts, and even finding common ground between Hindu and Islamic mysticism. 1. The political and cultural backdrop. The north in the late medieval period was a mosaic of states and sultanates. The Delhi Sultanate, founded 1206 CE, was the dominant political force, bringing Persianate culture and Sufi mysticism into greater contact with Hindu traditions. Regional kingdoms such as Mewar, the Rajput states, and the Bengal Sultanate shaped local politics and patronage. The Ganges Plains, with cities like Varanasi, Mathura, and Prayagraj, were spiritual heartlands, dotted with temples, ghats, and ashrams. This was also a period of linguistic flowering. Hindi, Awadhi, Braj Bhasha, Bhojpuri, Maithili, and other vernaculars gained literary prestige, creating fertile ground for a devotional literature accessible to the masses. 2. Seeds from the South. Southern saints and scholars were instrumental in transmitting Bhakti ideals northward. The philosophy of Ramanuj, with its emphasis on personal devotion to Vishnu and his incarnations, inspired northern Vaishnavite teachers. Pilgrims from Karnataka and Tamil Nadu carried sacred stories, ritual practices, and theological texts into the Deccan and beyond. Trade and pilgrimage between Rameswaram and Varanasi kept devotional networks alive. 3. The language revolution of Bhakti. One of the most transformative features of northern Bhakti was its embrace of the vernacular. Saints began composing in the everyday speech of their communities, not just in Sanskrit. This made devotional teachings accessible to farmers, artisans, women, and those excluded from formal education. Poetry in Hindi dialects such as Braj and Awadhi could be memorized, sung, and passed orally, ensuring wide reach. 4. The early northern saints. Several towering figures laid the foundation for the northern Bhakti Renaissance. Namdev, 1270 to 1350 CE. A saint from Maharashtra whose compositions bridged Marathi and Hindi traditions. His songs honored Vithoba, a form of Krishna, and stressed that the divine is present everywhere. Ramnanda, circa 1400 to 1470 CE. Considered one of the first great Vaishnavite reformers of North India. Broke with certain rigid caste restrictions, accepting disciples from all walks of life. His emphasis on the name of Rama as the supreme path to liberation became a rallying cry for later saints. 5. The Bhakti-Sufi confluence. The arrival of Sufi mysticism through Islamic rule in India introduced a parallel current of devotional practice. Sufis, like Bhakti poets, stressed love for God over ritualism. Both traditions valued the guru-disciple relationship, music, and the belief that God resides in the heart. In cities such as Delhi, Ajmer, and Multan, Bhakti singers and Sufi qawwals often shared public spaces, influencing each other's melodies and metaphors. This cross-cultural fertilization softened religious boundaries for many communities and nurtured a more inclusive spiritual culture. 6. Kabir, the voice of radical Bhakti. Perhaps no figure better embodies the northern Bhakti spirit than Kabir, circa 1440 to 1518 CE. A poet-saint who challenged both Hindu and Muslim orthodoxy. Taught that God is beyond name, form, or sect. Used everyday imagery, the loom, the river, the potter's wheel, to describe spiritual truths. His verses rejected empty ritual, caste divisions, and sectarian pride. Kabir's legacy was so universal that both Hindus and Muslims claimed him as their own. 7. Mirabai, the poetess of divine love. Mirabai, circa 1498 to 1543 CE, became one of the most beloved figures in the Vaishnavite tradition. A Rajput princess who devoted her life to Krishna, often portrayed as her divine lover. Composed hundreds of bhajans, devotional songs, in Rajasthani and Braj. Defied societal norms, rejecting royal duties to sing and wander as a devotee. Her songs' simplicity, emotional power, and romantic imagery made them timeless. 8. Vallabhacharya and Pushti Marg. In the early 16th century, Vallabhacharya founded the Pushti Marg, Path of Grace, tradition. Centered on the worship of Krishna as a playful child, Bala Krishna. Emphasized seva, loving service, over asceticism. Spread particularly in Gujarat and Rajasthan, fostering a rich tradition of temple music and art. 9. Surdas, the blind bard of Braj. Surdas, circa 1478 to 1583 CE, was a poet-singer whose work celebrated the childhood of Krishna. His Braj Bhasha verses painted vivid scenes of divine play in Vrindavan. Part of the Vallabhacharya tradition, he transformed the Krishna story into a deeply human, relatable experience. Surdas compositions remain staples in temple worship and Indian classical music. 10. Tulsidas and the Ramcharitmanas. In the late 16th century, Tulsidas reimagined the Sanskrit epic Ramayana in a wadi as the Ramcharitmanas. This made the story of Rama accessible to millions who could not read Sanskrit. Tulsidas emphasized Rama as both a divine ideal and a compassionate human king. His work became a spiritual and cultural cornerstone across North India. 11. Institutionalizing Bhakti in the North. Temples in Mathura, Vrindavan, Ayodhya, and Varanasi began to employ permanent singers to perform bhajans daily, hold large festivals honoring Krishna and Rama, organize pilgrimage networks connecting devotees from distant villages. 12. Bhakti as social protest. Many northern Bhakti saints critiqued the caste system, often rejecting the idea that spiritual worth was tied to birth. Defended the dignity of labor, weaving, farming, and crafting became metaphors for divine service. Stressed that inner purity mattered more than temple donations or ritual correctness. 13. The women's voices in Northern Bhakti. Alongside Mirabai, other women contributed to this devotional flowering. Lal Ded, from Kashmir, blended Shaivism with mystical verse. Sajo Bai and Mira's contemporaries in Rajasthan carried forward the tradition of intimate divine love. Their presence challenged the patriarchal norms of religious life, creating spaces for women's spirituality in public. 14. Music, dance, and folk performance. Northern Bhakti did not remain in poetry alone. Kirtans, call-and-response singing, became popular village gatherings. Raslila dramas reenacted Krishna's life with music and dance. Folk instruments like the ektara, dhalak, and manjira became synonymous with devotional singing. 15. The Mughal connection. Even under the Mughal Empire, certain emperors, like Akbar, encouraged religious dialogue, inviting Bhakti saints to court. Vrindavan and Mathura received royal grants for temple upkeep. The Mughal atelier painted scenes of Krishna and Rama alongside Persian miniatures. 16. Bhakti and literacy. By promoting literature in the vernacular, Bhakti poets helped standardize and elevate regional languages. Manuscripts of Kabir, Surdas, and Tulsidas spread widely, sometimes hand-copied in village schools. Devotional songs doubled as moral instruction, blending literacy with piety. 17. Pilgrimage networks. The Northern Bhakti movement revitalized old pilgrimage routes. Ayodhya, Varanasi, Prayagraj, and Mathura became major hubs. The Char Dham concept, including Badrinath, Puri, Rameswaram, and Dwarka, linked northern devotees with distant southern sites. Pilgrims often carried home not just holy water or prasad, but also new songs, stories, and theological ideas. 18. The democratic spirit of Bhakti. Above all, Northern Bhakti's hallmark was its accessibility. No requirement for Sanskrit learning. No barriers of caste or gender in devotional gatherings. God was presented as near, loving, and responsive to the humble seeker. 19. Challenges and tensions. Despite its inclusive ideals, some sects eventually reabsorbed caste distinctions into their structures. Political instability sometimes disrupted pilgrimage and temple life. The institutionalization of Bhakti occasionally led to the very ritualism its founders resisted. 20. Looking ahead. The Northern Bhakti Renaissance laid the groundwork for later Sikh teachings, which shared its emphasis on devotion, equality, and music. A pan-Indian devotional consciousness, linking Krishna's play in Vrindavan with Shiva's dance in Chidambaram. Enduring cultural treasures, songs, festivals, and folk art that still thrive in India today. In Part 10, we will explore the rise of regional devotional kingdoms in both North and South, when rulers saw themselves not just as patrons but as servants of their chosen deity, further entwining religion and governance. Part 10. Devotional Kingdoms, when rulers became servants of the gods. Between the 14th and 17th centuries, several Hindu kingdoms emerged or transformed in ways that blurred the boundaries between political authority and religious devotion. Kings and queens were no longer seen only as military protectors or administrators, many reimagined themselves as the earthly agents of a divine will. In these realms, governance was intertwined with worship, law with dharma, and royal duties with acts of seva, service, to the deity. This part of the series will explore how such devotional kingdoms shaped Hinduism's practice, its cultural expressions, and its deep regional diversity. 1. The idea of the devotional king. The notion of a king as a servant of the gods was not entirely new. Ancient Indian texts like the Arthashastra and the Dharmashastras had long described kingship as divinely sanctioned. However, in the medieval era, this idea evolved into something more intimate. Kings were not just upholders of dharma but direct servants of a chosen deity. Palaces and temples became inseparable. Sometimes the king's court was physically within a temple complex. Governance was framed as Rajadharma, but inspired by Bhakti ideals. This reorientation was partly a response to the political instability of the period. With the Delhi Sultanate and later the Mughals exerting pressure on Hindu rulers, kings needed a unifying spiritual identity to rally their people. 2. Vijayanagara Empire, the city of victory and Vishnu's service. Perhaps the most famous example of a devotional kingdom was the Vijayanagara Empire in South India, 1336 to 1646 CE. Founded by Harihara I and Bukka Raya I, who were guided by the sage Vidyaranya, the empire declared itself a protector of Hindu dharma. Its capital, Hampi, was a marvel of sacred architecture, temples, markets, and palaces intertwined in a single urban design. The kings took on titles linking them to Vishnu, especially in his forms as Rama and Krishna. Major temple expansions, such as the Virupaksh Temple and Vitala Temple, were funded and personally supervised by rulers. Royal festivals often featured the king himself carrying the deity's palanquin, symbolizing service rather than dominance. Culturally, Vijayanagara became a magnet for Sanskrit scholars, poets writing in Telugu and Kannada, dancers, and musicians, making it a hub for the preservation and spread of Hindu arts. 3. The Rajput Kingdoms, guardians of Dharma in the north. In the arid landscapes of Rajasthan, the Rajput kingdoms developed their own form of devotional kingship. Many Rajput rulers aligned themselves with specific deities. For example, the rulers of Mura were famously devoted to Eklingi, a form of Shiva. Palaces were often built next to temples, and royal processions doubled as religious rituals. Rajput painting schools, especially in Mura and Kishangar, produced exquisite depictions of Krishna's Lilas, divine plays, reflecting the blending of courtly and devotional life. Despite their martial identity, Rajput rulers patronized poets and saints, making their courts centers of Bhakti literature. 4. The Naika rulers and temple patronage in Tamil Nadu. After the fall of Vijayanagara in the mid-17th century, Naika rulers in Madurai, Tanjavur, and Jinji inherited its legacy of devotional statecraft. They expanded massive temple complexes such as the Meenakshi Amman Temple in Madurai, adding intricate gopurams, gateway towers, covered in vivid sculptures of gods, goddesses, and celestial beings. Temple festivals became vast civic events, uniting all social groups in the region. The Naika sponsored devotional literature in Tamil, Telugu, and Sanskrit, preserving oral traditions in written form. Their rule cemented the role of temples not just as places of worship, but as economic centers that employed thousands and managed large agricultural estates. 5. Orissa and the cult of Jagannath. In eastern India, the rulers of the Gajapati dynasty in Orissa, modern Odisha, placed Jagannath of Puri at the very heart of their rule. The king was seen as the chief servitor, Adhyasevak, of Jagannath, symbolizing that even the highest earthly authority was subordinate to the deity. The famous Rath Yatra, Chariot Festival, in Puri, in which the massive wooden chariots of Jagannath, Balabhadra, and Subhadra are pulled by devotees, was as much a royal as a religious event. The Jagannath temple served as a political and cultural anchor for the entire region, binding Orissa's identity to the deity. 6. The Maratha Kingdom and devotion to Bhavani. In the Deccan, the rise of the Maratha Empire under Shivaji, 1627 to 1680 CE, brought another model of devotional kingship. Shivaji was deeply devoted to the goddess Bhavani, whom he regarded as his divine protector. His coronation was performed according to ancient Vedic rituals, symbolizing the restoration of Hindu sovereignty. The Maratha court promoted curtains and storytelling traditions, like Katha, that blended politics with piety. 7. How devotional kingship shaped Hindu practice. The intertwining of kingship and bhakti had profound effects. Temples became administrative hubs, handling land grants, irrigation projects, and market regulation. Ritual calendars were often aligned with political events. A king's victory in battle might be celebrated as the deity's victory. Pilgrimage routes were maintained and secured by royal decree, ensuring safe travel for devotees. Festivals became displays of royal generosity, where food, gifts, and money were distributed freely. 8. The artistic golden age of devotional kingdoms. This was also a golden age for Hindu art. Temple architecture reached monumental scales: stone chariot shrines, towering gopurams, and pillared mandapas. Court painters produced devotional art that combined mythological themes with portraits of rulers. Music and dance flourished under royal patronage, with the Bharatanatyam and Kuchipudi traditions receiving structured support in southern courts. Literary output soared. Poets composed epics blending political heroism with divine devotion. 9. The role of women in devotional courts. Royal women also played important roles in devotional kingdoms. Queens sponsored temples and monastic institutions. In some cases, they composed devotional poetry themselves. Women from ruling families often acted as patrons to wandering saints, offering them safe passage and resources. 10. Balancing bhakti with statecraft. While kings framed themselves as servants of the gods, they still had to maintain armies, collect taxes, negotiate treaties with both Hindu and non-Hindu powers. This sometimes created tensions, for example, when temple resources were diverted to fund wars, or when a ruler's chosen deity conflicted with the devotional traditions of his subjects. 11. The decline of the devotional kingdom model. By the late 17th and 18th centuries, expanding Mughal control in the north and Deccan disrupted many Hindu courts. European colonial powers began inserting themselves into regional politics, altering patterns of temple patronage. In some places, temple wealth was seized or taxed heavily, reducing the scope of royal religious sponsorship. 12. Enduring legacy. Despite political changes, the devotional kingdom model left a lasting imprint. Major temple complexes built during this period remain active pilgrimage centers. Folk memories of kings like Krishna Deva Raya, Vijayanagara, and Shivaji continue to inspire. The blending of royal and religious ritual persists in festivals that still feature processions, symbolic offerings from local leaders, and public recitations of sacred stories. 13. Transition into modern devotional identities. Even under colonial rule, many regional elites continued to see themselves as custodians of a deity's estate rather than purely as political figures. In princely states such as Travancore, rulers maintained the identity of Padmanabha Dasa, servant of Lord Padmanabha, Vishnu. Such titles reinforce the enduring belief that human authority is legitimate only when it bows before divine authority. 14. Bhakti and cultural memory. Today, many aspects of Hindu temple culture, daily processions, grand festivals, the fusion of music and worship, are direct descendants of this era of devotional kingdoms. Pilgrims still walk the stone courtyards built by Vijayanagara kings. Krishna's image in Nathudvara still receives royal-style service modeled after centuries-old traditions. the Jagannath Rath Yatra continues to blend state and spiritual celebration in a way that mirrors medieval Orissa. In Part 11, we will shift focus to the Sikh movement and its connections to the Bhakti tradition, exploring how a new faith emerged in Punjab that absorbed and reinterpreted many devotional currents while also shaping Hinduism's trajectory in northern India. Part 11, the Sikh movement and its intersections with Hindu Bhakti. By the late 15th and early 16th centuries, northern India was a mosaic of cultural and religious influences. The Punjab region in particular had become a crossroads. It was a fertile agricultural zone where trade routes connected Central Asia to the Indian heartland. It was under the rule of the Delhi Sultanate, meaning Islamic governance coexisted with long-standing Hindu traditions. It was also a melting pot of devotional movements, from Vaishnava Bhakti poets to Sufi mystics. It was in this charged environment that Guru Nanak, 1469 to 1539 CE, emerged, founding what would become the Sikh faith. Sikhism is today recognized as a distinct religion, but in its formative stages, it interacted deeply with, and in some ways reoriented, the devotional traditions that had shaped Hinduism for centuries. This part will explore the historical setting that gave rise to Sikhism, the life and teachings of Guru Nanak, the Bhakti influences on Sikh philosophy, how early Sikhism related to Hindu practices, the evolution of the Sikh community under the later gurus, how the Sikh movement reshaped religious life in Punjab and beyond. 1. The Punjab of the 15th century, a frontier of faiths. In Guru Nanak's time, Punjab was neither wholly Hindu nor wholly Muslim, it was a shared cultural zone. Islamic rule was established, but not absolute. Mughal power had not yet fully solidified. Local chieftains and zamindars still wielded influence. Hindu society in the region included Rajput clans, Brahmins, farmers, artisans, and wandering ascetics. Bhakti poets, including those inspired by Ramananda, Kabir, and Namdev, had already been active, spreading messages of devotion that transcended caste. Sufi mystics from orders such as the Chishti and Qadiri preached love of God, musical devotion, qawwali, and service to humanity. Punjab's religious atmosphere was less about strict boundaries and more about overlapping spheres, a fertile ground for a teacher like Nanak. 2. Guru Nanak, early life and revelation. Born in 1469 in the village of Tulwandi, now Nankana Sahib in Pakistan, Nanak belonged to the Khatri merchant caste. His upbringing gave him exposure to both Hindu and Muslim traditions. His father, Mehta Kalu, expected him to take up a respectable trade. From a young age, Nanak showed a contemplative nature, preferring meditation and philosophical discussion to commerce. At around age 30, Nanak experienced a profound spiritual vision. After disappearing for 3 days in the river, a symbolic moment in Sikh tradition, he emerged with a message. There is no Hindu, there is no Muslim, so whose path shall I follow? I shall follow God's path. This statement was not a rejection of both religions but a call to see beyond religious labels and focus on direct devotion to the divine. 3. Core teachings, simplicity, equality, and devotion. Guru Nanak's philosophy combined elements from Bhakti, personal devotion, emphasis on God's name, Nam, rejection of empty ritual. Sufism, the idea of God as a beloved, the importance of music and poetry in worship. Vedic and Sant traditions, concepts of unity of the soul and the divine. Key principles included Ekankar, there is one reality. God is formless, eternal, and beyond sectarian divisions. Nam Japna, meditating on and repeating the divine name. Kirat Karni, honest work as a form of worship. Van Chakna, sharing earnings with the community. Equality, rejecting caste hierarchy and gender discrimination. Rejection of superstition, focus on internal transformation, not ritual purity. 4. Bhakti influence on Sikhism. Nanak's approach resonated strongly with Bhakti ideas. Direct personal devotion, like Mirabai or Tukaram, Nanak saw the relationship with God as intimate and unmediated by priestly classes. Use of vernacular language, Nanak composed hymns in Punjabi and other dialects, just as earlier Bhakti poets wrote in the local tongues instead of Sanskrit. Inclusivity, Bhakti often challenged caste. Sikhism institutionalized this challenge by creating the langar, community kitchen, where all sat and ate together. Where Sikhism differed was in its formal break from idol worship and its rejection of associating God with any particular form, which gave it a more iconoclastic stance compared to many Hindu Bhakti sects. 5. The Guru Granth Sahib, a shared devotional text. One of Sikhism's most remarkable contributions is the Guru Granth Sahib, the central scripture compiled by the fifth Guru, Arjan Dev, in 1604. It contains not only the writings of Sikh gurus but also hymns by Hindu Bhakti saints like Kabir, Namdev, Ravidas, and Sheikh Farid, a Muslim Sufi. This inclusion shows how Sikhism saw devotional truth as transcending religious identity. The use of ragas, classical musical modes, for all hymns also reflects both Bhakti and Sufi traditions, where music was a path to God. 6. Sikhism under the later gurus. After Nanak, 9 successive gurus led the Sikh community, gradually giving it structure. Guru Angad standardized the Gurmukhi script, enabling a distinct literary tradition. Guru Amar Das expanded the langar system and appointed women as preachers. Guru Ram Das founded Amritsar, which became the spiritual center of Sikhism. Guru Arjan Dev oversaw the construction of the Harmandir Sahib, Golden Temple, and compiled the Adi Granth. Guru Hargobind introduced the concept of Mirapai, combining spiritual authority with temporal responsibility. Guru Gobind Singh, the 10th Guru, transformed the community into the Khalsa in 1699, a disciplined order with a code of conduct, martial training, and distinct identity. 7. Sikhism's relationship with Hinduism in practice. In its early centuries, many Punjabi Hindus revered the Sikh gurus alongside their own deities. Some Hindu families sent one son to become a Sikh, Sant Sipahi, or saint soldier, blending religious allegiance. Festivals like Diwali were celebrated at Sikh shrines, often with distinct interpretations, e.g., Diwali at the Golden Temple commemorates the release of Guru Hargobind from imprisonment. Over time, especially during periods of political struggle, Sikh identity became more distinct, but cultural overlaps persisted. 8. The Sikh challenge to social hierarchy. Sikhism's rejection of caste was revolutionary in Punjab. The langar forced social mixing in a way that even many Bhakti sects did not sustain in practice. The gurus welcomed contributions from artisans, farmers, and marginalized communities. Many became prominent figures in Sikh history. This egalitarianism influenced nearby Hindu communities, encouraging reforms that softened rigid caste boundaries. 9. Political power and the Sikh kingdoms. By the 18th century, after surviving Mughal persecution, Sikhism developed into a confederacy of misls, warrior bands. This eventually led to the rise of the Sikh Empire under Maharaja Ranjit Singh in the early 19th century. Ranjit Singh maintained a multi-religious court, with Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs in high positions. Hindu temples and Sikh gurdwaras both received patronage. This era reflected a political reality shaped by the inclusivity that began with the Bhakti-influenced teachings of Nanak. 10. Enduring impact on Hinduism. Sikhism's emergence affected Hindu practice in several ways. Reinforced vernacular spirituality. The success of Punjabi devotional hymns encouraged other regions to value local languages in worship. Egalitarian dining traditions. The langar model inspired similar communal kitchens in some Hindu temples. Interfaith respect. Nanak's call to see beyond Hindu or Muslim resonated with later Hindu reformers. In Part 12, we will return more fully to the Hindu story, exploring the late medieval Bhakti wave in northern India, focusing on figures like Tulsidas, Surdas, and Mirabai, and seeing how their poetry reshaped Vaishnava devotion while interacting with the growing Sikh and Islamic cultural presence. Part 12, The Northern Bhakti Renaissance, Saints, Songs, and spiritual democratization. By the late medieval period in India, the devotional, bhakti, tradition had already taken root in the south for centuries through the voices of the Alvars and Nayanars. But in the north, between the 15th and 17th centuries, it took on a new form, one that blended deep emotional intimacy with the divine, poetic beauty in the languages of the people, and a subtle yet profound social transformation. This era produced some of the most celebrated poet saints in Indian history, Tulsidas, Surdas, Kabir, and Mirabai, each crafting a unique devotional path while contributing to a broader cultural and religious revolution. 1. The Northern Indian context, a crossroads of faith and power. From the 1400s onward, northern India was a tapestry of diverse powers and influences. The Delhi Sultanate had fragmented, leaving regional rulers and warlords to control various provinces. The Mughal Empire, established in 1526 by Babur, introduced a new political era, blending Central Asian, Persian, and Indian traditions. Trade routes connected North India to Central Asia, Persia, and the Arabian world, bringing in goods, languages, and philosophical ideas. This political and cultural environment shaped the Bhakti movement in several key ways. The presence of Islamic rule encouraged some Hindu thinkers to focus on personal, portable devotion, independent of temple structures. Sufism, with its own emphasis on love for God and mystical poetry, interacted fruitfully with Bhakti ideals. Vernacular languages became powerful spiritual tools, as Sanskrit remained a language of scholars and priests, often inaccessible to the common person. 2. The vernacular turn, bringing God closer to the people. Unlike the Sanskrit scriptures and commentaries that dominated earlier centuries, the northern Bhakti saints composed their works in Awadhi, Braj Bhasha, Bhojpuri, Maithili, and Rajasthani. This had multiple effects. Accessibility: farmers, artisans, and women, often excluded from Sanskrit education, could participate fully in religious life. Cultural unification: a shared poetic language began to bridge regional dialects. Transmission: oral performance made it possible for verses to spread rapidly, carried by wandering singers and storytellers. 3. Tulsidas, the storyteller of Rama's compassion. Tulsidas, 1532–1623, was born in Rajapur, in present-day Uttar Pradesh. Though many legends surround his early life, including his deep devotion to Rama from childhood, his historical significance is clear. He retold the story of Rama in a way that transformed northern devotional life. The Ramcharitmanas. Written in Awadhi, Ramcharitmanas recasts Valmiki's Sanskrit Ramayana with an emphasis on divine compassion rather than royal heroism. It portrays Rama not just as a king and warrior, but as the embodiment of moral perfection and unconditional love. The work became, and remains, a central devotional text for millions of Hindus, often treated as scripture. Themes. Bhakti over ritual: true devotion is greater than formal worship. Moral exemplars: Rama and Sita as the ideals of virtue, loyalty, and righteousness. Unity of philosophy and emotion: Tulsidas wove Vedantic ideas into a deeply personal devotional framework. Cultural legacy. Inspired the Ramlila tradition, annual folk theater dramatizing Rama's life. Provided a moral framework for community life, especially in rural North India. Elevated the vernacular epic to the status of sacred text. 4. Surdas, the singer of Krishna's childhood. Surdas, circa 1478–1583, was a blind poet who became the voice of Madhura Bhakti. Sweet, romantic devotion to Krishna, often expressed through the playful and loving episodes of his youth in Vrindavan. The Surzagar. A vast collection of devotional songs, many centered on Krishna's childhood pranks, his relationship with the cowherd women, gopis, and his divine charm. His works blend theology with deep emotional intimacy, inviting the devotee to see God as child, friend, or beloved. Impact. Popularized Braj Bhasha as a devotional language. Gave rise to temple singing traditions still active today. Reinforced the idea that divine love could be playful, sweet, and deeply human. 5. Kabir, the voice between religions. Kabir, circa 1440 to 1518, though often placed slightly earlier than Tulsidas and Surdas, was an important influence on the northern Bhakti tradition. He challenged both Hindu and Muslim orthodoxy, emphasizing the formless divine beyond sectarian boundaries. His poetry, composed in simple Hindi, spoke to weavers, farmers, and laborers. His verses are included in the Sikh Guru Granth Sahib, highlighting the interconnectedness of devotional traditions. 6. Mirabai, devotion beyond social constraints. Mirabai, circa 1498 to 1547, was a Rajput princess who defied societal and familial pressures to devote her life entirely to Krishna. Her poetry. Written in Rajasthani and Braj, her songs are intensely personal, often speaking directly to Krishna as her eternal husband. Themes of longing, viraha, spiritual ecstasy, and renunciation of worldly ties dominate her work. Her legacy became a symbol of spiritual independence, especially for women. Her songs are sung in both folk gatherings and classical concerts. Inspired future generations to place personal devotion above social obligations. 7. Interaction with Sufism and Sikhism. The northern Bhakti saints did not exist in isolation. Sufi mystics composed qawwalis and poetry with strikingly similar themes of divine love. Early Sikh gurus, such as Guru Nanak, shared Bhakti's emphasis on devotion over ritual and rejection of caste. This intermingling of devotional traditions created an atmosphere of spiritual pluralism in many regions, even amid political tensions. 8. Everyday impact of the Bhakti movement. Music and song. Bhakti popularized bhajan and kirtan gatherings, making worship communal and joyful. Festivals. The Ram Leela and Krishna Lilas brought sacred stories to life in accessible, dramatic form. Social inclusion. Although caste barriers persisted, the Bhakti saints consistently preached that God's grace was available to all. Women's participation. Figures like Mirabai legitimized active female leadership in devotional circles. 9. The enduring influence. Even today, Tulsidas Ramcharitmanas is recited daily in homes and temples. Surdas verses are sung during Janmashtami and other Krishna festivals. Mirabai's songs remain staples of devotional repertoires. Kabir's dohas, couplets, are still quoted in conversations about morality and spirituality. The Northern Bhakti Renaissance permanently reshaped Hinduism's cultural landscape, not by political decree, but through the gentle yet transformative power of poetry, song, and love for the divine. Part 13. Hinduism in the Mughal Era, Tolerance, Tension, and Transformation. When the Mughal Empire emerged in the early 16th century, it brought with it not just military power but also a rich tapestry of Central Asian, Persian, and Islamic cultural traditions. From its inception under Babur to its zenith under Akbar and its eventual decline, the empire's relationship with Hinduism was dynamic, sometimes harmonious, sometimes strained. This period saw Hinduism adapt, preserve, and even thrive in new contexts, while also facing challenges that would influence its trajectory for centuries to come. 1. Setting the stage, the Mughal rise to power. In 1526, Babur, a descendant of Timur and Genghis Khan, defeated the Delhi Sultan Ibrahim Lodi at the Battle of Panipat. This victory established the Mughal dynasty in northern India. Cultural background. Babur brought with him Persianate court culture, Central Asian military traditions, and the administrative legacies of earlier Islamic empires. Religious demographics. Hindus were the majority population, while the Mughals and their Muslim nobility were a small ruling minority. From the very beginning, the Mughal rulers had to find a balance between asserting Islamic identity and governing a predominantly Hindu land. 2. Early Mughal-Hindu relations under Babur and Humayun. Babur's reign was short, 1526 to 1530, and while his memoirs, Baburnama, are more concerned with military campaigns and gardens than with religious policy, there are indications of limited engagement with Hindu elites, mostly for pragmatic alliances. Respect for certain Indian customs, though not deep integration. Humayun, 1530–1540, restored 1555–1556, spent much of his reign in exile due to defeats by Sher Shah Suri. During his brief return to power before his death, he reintroduced Persianate culture and maintained cordial ties with certain Hindu Rajput states. 3. Akbar the Great, the era of syncretism and dialogue. Akbar, 1542–1605, is perhaps the most famous Mughal ruler for his religious policies. The policy of Sulai-Kul, universal peace, established an official philosophy of tolerance toward all religious communities. Abolished the jizya tax on non-Muslims in 1564. Encouraged interfaith debates at his court in Fatehpur Sikri. Interfaith dialogues. Invited Hindu, Jain, Zoroastrian, Christian, and Muslim scholars to discuss theology. Gave patronage to Sanskrit scholars and commissioned translations of Hindu epics like the Mahabharata, Raznama, and Ramayana into Persian. Encouraged marriages between Mughal princes and Rajput princesses, creating bonds of loyalty. Temples and patronage. Allowed the construction and restoration of Hindu temples. Rajput allies like Raja Man Singh of Amber rose to prominent military and administrative positions in the empire. Akbar's reign marked a high point of cultural synthesis, where Hindu architecture, art, and philosophy interwove with Islamic and Persian aesthetics. 4. Jahangir and Shah Jahan, continuity and subtle shifts. Jahangir, 1605–1627. Continued Akbar's policies of relative tolerance. Married Hindu princesses and maintained close relations with Rajput states. Patronized Hindu and Jain scholars, while also strengthening Islamic orthodoxy in some areas. Shah Jahan, 1628–1658. Known for his architectural masterpieces, including the Taj Mahal, which, while Islamic in design, was influenced by Indian artistry. Maintained the empire's Hindu alliances but reintroduced some orthodox Islamic measures. Oversaw temple building by Hindu nobles but also sanctioned the destruction of temples in politically rebellious areas. 5. Aurangzeb, orthodoxy and repression. Aurangzeb, 1658–1707, represented a marked departure from the syncretic policies of Akbar. Religious policies. Reimposed the jizya tax on non-Muslims in 1679. Ordered the demolition of several Hindu temples, particularly in regions that rebelled against Mughal authority, e.g., Kashi Vishwanath in Varanasi, Kesva Deo in Mathura. Banned certain Hindu religious fairs and practices in imperial territories. Political motivations. While Aurangzeb's religious orthodoxy was genuine, many temple destructions were politically strategic, targeting centers of rebellion rather than random religious persecution. Hindu resistance. The rise of the Maratha Confederacy under Shivaji Maharaj, who championed Hindu sovereignty. The continued patronage of Hindu temples and traditions in regions outside direct Mughal control. 6. Hinduism's cultural resilience under the Mughals. Despite political pressures, Hinduism adapted creatively during Mughal rule. Art and architecture, temples in Rajasthan and South India flourished, blending local styles with Mughal ornamentation. Literature, Bhakti poets continued composing in vernacular languages, court patronage produced rich Persian translations of Hindu works. Pilgrimage, major sites like Varanasi, Puri, and Rameswaram remained active centers of worship. 7. The role of regional Hindu kingdoms. Several Hindu-ruled regions maintained relative autonomy while interacting with the Mughals. Rajput states, Amber, Mewar, Marwar, negotiated military alliances in exchange for religious freedoms. Vijayanagara Empire in the south preserved a strong Hindu cultural center until its fall in 1565. Marathas emerged as a political and military counterweight to Mughal dominance in the 17th century. 8. Interfaith cultural blending. Even in times of political strain, cultural exchange flourished. Mughal miniature paintings often depicted Hindu themes, including Krishna Lilas and episodes from the Ramayana. Hindu artisans contributed to Mughal architecture and jewelry. Shared music traditions, such as Dhrupad and Khyal, evolved in courts where both Hindu and Muslim musicians performed. 9. The decline of the Mughal Empire and Hindu reassertion. By the early 18th century, the empire was weakened by succession crises, regional revolts, and economic strain. Hindu powers such as the Marathas, Jats, and Sikhs expanded their territories. The weakening of centralized Mughal authority allowed Hindu kingdoms greater autonomy to promote their religious and cultural traditions. 10. Legacy of the Mughal-Hindu encounter. The Mughal period left Hinduism with architectural influence. Dome and arch motifs entered temple design in some regions. Literary enrichment. Persian translations of Sanskrit epics circulated widely, influencing both Muslim and Hindu readerships. Religious dialogue. Akbar's era in particular remains a model of state-supported pluralism. Cultural synthesis. Mughal art, music, and fashion left an enduring imprint on Hindu society. Part 14. The resurgence of Hindu kingdoms in the post-Mughal era. As the mighty Mughal Empire began to fracture in the late 17th and early 18th centuries, a dramatic shift occurred across the Indian subcontinent. The political vacuum left by declining central authority gave rise to a series of powerful Hindu-led states and confederacies. These kingdoms not only asserted military dominance in their regions but also revitalized Hindu culture, patronized temples, encouraged the arts, and in many cases became bastions of resistance against both Mughal remnants and incoming European colonial powers. This chapter will explore the major regional Hindu powers of the post-Mughal era, including the Marathas, Rajputs, Jats, and others, tracing how they navigated a complex world of shifting alliances, internal rivalries, and the looming shadow of foreign influence. 1. The collapse of Mughal central authority. By the late 1600s, the Mughal Empire was already showing cracks. Aurangzeb's long reign, 1658 to 1707, while expanding the empire territorially, drained its finances and alienated significant segments of the population through religious and administrative policies. After Aurangzeb's death in 1707, the empire faced successive weak rulers, palace intrigues, and civil wars. Regional governors, subahtars, began acting with increasing independence, keeping revenue for themselves rather than remitting it to the imperial treasury. This environment of fragmentation created opportunities for local Hindu rulers to assert autonomy and, in many cases, outright sovereignty. 2. The rise of the Marathas, Hindu sovereignty reimagined. The Maratha Confederacy was perhaps the most formidable of the post-Mughal Hindu powers. Origins and ideology. Founded by Shivaji Maharaj, 1630 to 1680, a brilliant military strategist and statesman, the Marathas carved out an independent Hindu kingdom in the western Deccan. Shivaji was crowned Chhatrapati, sovereign king, in 1674 at Raigad, reviving Hindu courtly traditions and asserting Hindu political identity. He promoted a vision of Hindavi Swarajya, self-rule for Hindus, which resonated far beyond the Maratha homeland. Military innovations. The Marathas perfected guerrilla warfare, exploiting the rugged Deccan terrain to outmaneuver larger armies. Built an extensive network of forts, many on hilltops, which served as both military strongholds and administrative centers. Expansion after Shivaji. Under leaders like Peshwa Balaji Vishwanath and his successors, the Marathas extended their influence across much of India. By the mid-18th century, the Marathas had become the de facto power in the north, collecting tribute from former Mughal territories. Cultural patronage. Maratha rulers supported temple construction, Sanskrit scholarship, and regional literature in Marathi. They restored and maintained important pilgrimage sites, such as Varanasi and Rameswaram. 3. The Rajput states, tradition and adaptation. The Rajputs, warrior clans from Rajasthan, had a long history of both resistance to and cooperation with the Mughals. In the post-Mughal period, they reasserted independence. Key states. Mewar, Udaipur maintained a fierce sense of Rajput identity, often resisting outside domination. Amber/Jaipur, adapted diplomatically, forging strategic alliances with both Mughals and later the British. Jodhpur/Marwar expanded influence in western Rajasthan and played an important role in regional politics. Cultural contributions. Patronage of Rajput miniature painting, blending indigenous and Mughal styles. Temple building and the preservation of Hindu rituals, even under external political pressures. 4. The Jats, agrarian power turned political force. The Jats, originally an agricultural community in the north, transformed into a formidable political power in the 18th century. Rise to prominence. Under leaders like Maharaja Suraj Mal, the Jats established the kingdom of Bhartapur. Successfully resisted Mughal and Afghan incursions, controlling key forts and trade routes. Cultural impact. Supported the building of temples and palaces, blending Hindu and Rajasthani architectural motifs. Encouraged agrarian reforms that boosted local prosperity. 5. Other Hindu regional powers. The Kingdom of Mysore. Though later ruled by Muslim sultans like Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan, Mysore's earlier Vodayar dynasty was Hindu and laid the foundation for a strong, centralized state. Maintained important temples and patronized Kannada literature. Travancore, Kerala. The Hindu royal family of Travancore maintained strong ties to the Padmanabhaswamy temple, famously dedicating the entire kingdom to Lord Vishnu in a symbolic act of devotion. Invested in temple architecture, Sanskrit learning, and the promotion of Ayurveda. The Kingdom of Nepal. The Shah dynasty, founded by Prithvi Narayan Shah, united much of the Himalayan region while maintaining a strong Hindu identity. Nepal became a sanctuary for Hindu traditions during periods of turmoil in India. 6. Religious and cultural revival. The resurgence of Hindu-led states in this period had a profound cultural impact. Temple restoration. Many temples destroyed or neglected during the later Mughal years were restored or rebuilt. Pilgrimage revival. Safe passage to sites like Kashi, Puri, Dwarka, and Rameswaram was re-established under Hindu protection. Literature and arts. Vernacular languages flourished alongside Sanskrit. Poetry, drama, and devotional literature received royal patronage. Bhakti movement continuation. Saints and poets continued spreading devotional teachings that transcended caste and regional divides. 7. Challenges from outside forces. While Hindu states gained strength, they faced new challenges. Afghan invasions. Ahmad Shah Durrani's incursions in the mid-18th century culminated in the Third Battle of Panipat, 1761, a devastating defeat for the Marathas. European encroachment, Portuguese, Dutch, French, and especially British influence expanded steadily through trade, diplomacy, and military force. 8. The Maratha apex and decline. By the mid-18th century, the Marathas were the most powerful force in India, controlling territory from the south to the gates of Delhi. However, internal rivalries among Maratha chiefs weakened unity. The Third Battle of Panipat severely curtailed their northern ambitions. The British East India Company began systematically exploiting divisions among Indian states, including the Marathas. 9. Legacy of the post-Mughal Hindu states. This period left Hinduism with political confidence, proof that Hindu-led states could challenge and even replace dominant Islamic powers. Cultural renaissance, revival of temple-centered life, regional languages, and art. Military traditions, strong warrior cultures that would later play roles in resisting colonial expansion. Part 15, Colonial Shadows, European Expansion and Hinduism's Adaptation. By the early 16th century, India's coasts were no longer isolated from Europe's maritime ambitions. What began with Portuguese caravels on the western shores eventually became a vast and complex network of trade posts, political treaties, and, eventually, colonial domination. For Hindu society, this centuries-long European presence brought both disruption and unexpected opportunities for adaptation. Temples rose and fell, new economic patterns emerged, and Hindu communities found themselves navigating a cultural landscape increasingly shaped by foreign influence. In this chapter, we'll trace the arrival and consolidation of European powers in India, explore how they interacted with Hindu society, and examine the ways in which Hinduism transformed in response to the colonial era. 1. First landfall, the Portuguese and early European encounters. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to arrive in force in India, setting a precedent for trade and political interference. Vasco da Gama and the sea route to India. In 1498, Vasco da Gama's voyage to Calicut marked the opening of a direct sea link between Europe and India. The Portuguese established a stronghold at Goa in 1510, which became the capital of their Eastern Empire. Impact on Hindu communities. Goa's Hindu population faced significant pressure from Portuguese missionary activities. The Goa Inquisition targeted non-Christian religious practices, leading to temple destruction and conversions. Many Hindu families fled Portuguese territories, taking their traditions inland or southward. Economic changes. Portuguese control over maritime trade routes altered long-standing patterns of commerce. Hindu merchants had to adapt to new customs regulations, taxes, and the introduction of European currency. 2. The Dutch and French, trade without large-scale conversion. The Dutch East India Company, VOC. The Dutch established posts in the south and along the Coromandel coast. Their focus was primarily commercial, trading in textiles, spices, and indigo. Hindu communities in Dutch areas often experienced less religious interference compared to Portuguese-controlled regions. The French East India Company. Centered in Pondicherry, the French maintained cordial relations with many Hindu rulers. The French patronized local artisans, commissioning Hindu temple carvings and textiles for export. 3. The British East India Company, from trade to political power. The British entry into India marked the beginning of a transformative, often disruptive, era for Hindu society. Initial trade relations. Founded in 1600, the British East India Company initially traded under the permission of Mughal authorities. Hindu merchants, especially in Bengal and Gujarat, found opportunities in supplying goods for export. Shift to political dominance. The Battle of Plassey, 1757, marked a decisive turn, giving the British control over Bengal. Over the next century, they expanded into territories ruled by Hindu and Muslim rulers alike. 4. Hindu society under company rule. Land revenue and agrarian disruption. British land policies, such as the permanent settlement in Bengal, disrupted traditional agrarian systems. Many Hindu peasants lost land to moneylenders, and temple estates, once supported by land grants, struggled to sustain themselves. Changes in temple economy. The British often reduced or withdrew royal endowments to temples, weakening the economic base of Hindu religious institutions. However, in some areas, they acted as temple patrons to secure local goodwill. 5. Missionary influence and religious reform pressures. With British control came the active presence of Christian missionaries. Educational reforms. Missionary schools introduced English education, Christian texts, and Western philosophy. This sometimes led to conversions, but it also created a class of English-educated Hindu elites who became reformers. Religious reform movements. Hindu leaders like Raja Ram Mohan Roy responded by advocating reform within Hinduism, emphasizing monotheism and ethical purity. The Brahmo Samaj emerged, challenging caste discrimination and idolatry while seeking to preserve core Hindu principles. 6. Early resistance and accommodation. Hindu rulers and communities reacted differently to colonial intrusion. Resistance. The Marathas, Mysore under Tipu Sultan, allied with Hindu chiefs, and later the Sikh Empire resisted British expansion. Accommodation. Some rulers entered into subsidiary alliances, preserving nominal autonomy while ceding military and diplomatic control. 7. Cultural exchange and hybrid traditions. Despite political domination, the colonial era saw the emergence of hybrid cultural forms. Art and architecture. European neoclassical styles blended with Hindu temple architecture. Language. English loanwords entered many Indian languages, while Sanskrit texts were translated into European languages. Cuisine. European ingredients such as potatoes, tomatoes, and chili peppers were incorporated into Indian cooking, altering Hindu dietary traditions. 8. Social reform and the role of women. British law and reformist pressure impacted Hindu social customs. The abolition of sati, 1829, under Governor-General William Bentinck, supported by reformers like Ram Mohan Roy. Laws against child marriage and support for widow remarriage emerged later in the century. While controversial in their time, these reforms gradually altered Hindu family and social structures. 9. The 1857 Rebellion, Religious and Cultural Dimensions. The Indian Rebellion of 1857 was sparked partly by fears of religious pollution. Hindu and Muslim soldiers believed that rifle cartridges were greased with cow and pig fat, violating religious taboos. Many Hindu soldiers joined the uprising, seeing it as a defense of dharma and tradition. The rebellion's failure marked the end of company rule and the beginning of direct British crown control. 10. Hinduism in the late 19th century. After 1858, Hindu society faced a more centralized colonial administration. Railways and pilgrimage. Ironically, British-built railways made pilgrimage to sacred sites faster and more accessible. Print culture. Hindu scriptures, epics, and commentaries were printed widely, increasing religious literacy. New movements. The Arya Samaj, founded by Swami Dayananda Saraswati, called for a return to Vedic purity, rejecting later accretions. 11. Seeds of nationalism. By the late 19th century, Hindu leaders began linking religious identity to national awakening. Figures like Bal Gangadhar Tilak used festivals like Ganesh Chaturthi to promote unity and resistance to British rule. Hindu imagery and mythology entered nationalist literature, inspiring movements for independence. Part 16. The Hindu Renaissance and the Nationalist Awakening. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were a period of remarkable transformation for Hinduism. The pressures and disruptions of colonial rule, the advent of Western education, and the rise of new global ideas produced a fresh wave of religious and cultural reform. Out of this environment emerged a period often called the Hindu Renaissance, a reawakening of spiritual pride, scholarly revival, and cultural confidence. At the same time, political nationalism began to entwine itself with Hindu identity, as religious and historical narratives became rallying points for India's independence movement. This chapter will explore how Hindu thinkers, reformers, and leaders navigated a colonial modernity, how religious traditions were reframed for a global stage, and how Hinduism both shaped and was shaped by the quest for national self-determination. 1. Defining the Hindu Renaissance. The term, Hindu Renaissance, is not a formal label from the period itself but rather a scholarly description of the sweeping changes that occurred between the late 19th century and the early decades of the 20th. It was characterized by reform movements that sought to reinterpret Hinduism in light of rationalism and social ethics, cultural revivals that celebrated Hindu art, music, literature, and philosophy, global engagement with the West, often through international lectures and spiritual missions, nationalist currents that drew upon Hindu symbolism and heritage as unifying forces. While deeply rooted in tradition, the Renaissance was forward-looking, seeking to position Hinduism as both a modern religion and an ancient source of wisdom. 2. Intellectual foundations of reform. Impact of English education. British-style education exposed Hindu elites to Enlightenment philosophy, modern science, and liberal political thought. This produced a generation that could fluently converse in both Sanskrit and English, bridging traditional knowledge with global discourse. Orientalist scholarship. European Indologists translated and studied ancient Sanskrit texts, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with bias. The rediscovery of the Vedas, Upanishads, and epics in European languages boosted Hindu pride in their intellectual heritage. 3. Key figures in the Hindu Renaissance. Raja Ram Mohan Roy, 1772–1833. Founder of the Brahmo Samaj. Advocated monotheism, condemned caste discrimination, and campaigned for social reforms such as the abolition of sati. His work laid the foundation for later reformers. Swami Dayananda Sarasvati, 1824–1883. Founder of the Arya Samaj. Emphasized a return to the pure Vedic religion, rejecting idol worship and promoting education for all castes. Called for national self-reliance decades before political nationalism took center stage. Swami Vivekananda, 1863–1902. A disciple of Ramakrishna Paramahansa, Vivekananda became the global face of Hinduism after his address at the Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago, 1893. Advocated for the unity of all religions, social service, and the revival of Hindu confidence. Founded the Ramakrishna Mission, combining spiritual teachings with educational and humanitarian work. 4. New movements and institutions. The Ramakrishna Mission blended spiritual practice with practical service, schools, hospitals, and relief work. Encouraged disciplined self-improvement as a form of devotion. Arya Samaj schools and colleges. Introduced modern subjects alongside Vedic studies. Actively promoted women's education and opposed child marriage. Theosophical Society. Founded by Helena Blavatsky and Henry Steele Olcott, it relocated its headquarters to Udyar, near Madras. Although led by foreigners, it promoted Indian spiritual traditions and influenced Indian self-perception. 5. Hinduism and nationalist imagination. The nationalist movement drew heavily on Hindu history, mythology, and symbolism. Religious festivals as political platforms. Leaders like Bal Gangadhar Tilak transformed Ganesh Chaturthi into a public celebration, encouraging unity and anti-colonial sentiment. Mother India as a goddess. The concept of Bharat Mata, Mother India, became a powerful symbol, blending devotion with patriotism. Mythic heroes as national icons. Figures like Rama, Krishna, and Shivaji were evoked as examples of righteous leadership and resistance. 6. Literature and the arts in the Renaissance. Literary revival. Bankim Chandra Chatterjee's novel Anandamath introduced Vande Mataram, which became a nationalist anthem. Rabindranath Tagore's poetry and songs blended spiritual and patriotic themes. Visual arts. Artists of the Bengal school, such as Abanindranath Tagore, drew upon Hindu epics and traditional painting styles. Music and theater. Traditional devotional music was adapted to carry nationalist messages. Mythological plays subtly paralleled colonial oppression with stories of demonic tyrants. 7. Social reform and internal debates. While nationalism united many, reform movements also stirred internal debates within Hindu society. Caste system. Reformers sought to reduce caste rigidity, but traditionalists resisted. Women's rights. Campaigns for widow remarriage, education, and property rights faced opposition from conservative circles. Religious orthodoxy. Reformers who criticized idol worship or polytheism often faced backlash from temple establishments. 8. Hinduism on the world stage. Swami Vivekananda's global influence. His message of tolerance and spiritual unity resonated in the United States and Europe. Sparked interest in yoga and Vedanta among Western audiences. Annie Besant's role. As president of the Theosophical Society, she championed Indian self-rule and Hindu cultural pride. Founded the Central Hindu College, which later became part of Banaras Hindu University. 9. The early 20th century, shifting momentum. Partition of Bengal, 1905. Sparked massive protests, many led by Hindu leaders, as it was perceived as an attempt to divide communities. Swadeshi movement encouraged the boycott of British goods and revival of indigenous crafts. Gandhian influence. Although Mahatma Gandhi drew heavily from Jain and Hindu principles, his approach of nonviolence, ahimsa, resonated across religions. Hindu symbols like the spinning wheel, charkha, became icons of the independence movement. 10. Hinduism's philosophical adaptations. Leaders emphasized universalism in Hindu philosophy, portraying it as compatible with science and modern values. Concepts like karma and dharma were framed in ethical, rather than purely ritual, terms. 11. Challenges in a multi-religious nationalism. While Hinduism played a major role in the cultural revival, nationalists had to balance it with the need for unity among Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, and others. Some criticized overt Hindu imagery in politics as alienating to non-Hindu Indians. Others argued that Hindu culture formed the foundation of Indian civilization and could be inclusive. 12. Enduring legacy of the Hindu Renaissance. By the 1930s, the influence of the Hindu Renaissance was evident in increased literacy in Sanskrit and vernacular languages, a stronger global awareness of Hindu philosophy, social reforms that, while incomplete, had set new expectations for equality and justice. The movement left Hinduism better equipped to navigate both modernity and tradition, and deeply entwined with India's emerging political identity. Part 17. Hinduism in the struggle for independence and the turmoil of partition. By the mid-1930s, India's independence movement had grown into a mass phenomenon. What had once been the work of a small educated elite had expanded into a nationwide surge of activism, mobilizing farmers, workers, students, and spiritual leaders alike. Hinduism's role in this era was complex. On the one hand, it was a source of inspiration and moral authority for many activists. On the other, it became intertwined with rising communal tensions, as political divisions deepened along religious lines. This part will explore the final phase of the independence movement through the lens of Hindu history, the use of Hindu imagery in political mobilization, the participation of Hindu reformers and ascetics, the challenges of building unity in a diverse religious landscape, and the profound impact of the partition of India on Hindu society. 1. The intensification of political mobilization. From localized movements to nationwide campaigns. The civil disobedience movement and Quit India movement transformed politics into a mass movement. Hindu religious leaders, temples, and organizations provided spaces for meetings, fundraising, and planning. Festivals and pilgrimages were often used as cover for political gatherings when colonial authorities banned large protests. The Congress Party and Hindu representation. Although officially secular, the Indian National Congress had many prominent Hindu leaders, including Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Vallabhbhai Patel, and Rajendra Prasad. Gandhi in particular framed the fight for independence in terms that drew heavily from Hindu ethics, ahimsa, nonviolence, satyagraha, truth force, and sarvodaya, welfare of all. 2. Gandhi's religious nationalism. The spiritual foundation of his politics. Gandhi interpreted Hindu principles in a way that was inclusive and moral rather than doctrinal. He saw ahimsa as a universal law of compassion, not just a Jain or Hindu ideal. The spinning wheel, charka, though a political symbol of self-reliance, also became a kind of sacred emblem, associated with the dignity of labor and humility. Religious inclusivity. Gandhi read the Gita daily but also quoted from the Bible, Quran, and Buddhist texts. His inclusive stance drew admiration but also criticism from hardline Hindu nationalists who felt he compromised too much. 3. Hindu reformers and activists of the late colonial period. Vinoba Bhave. A disciple of Gandhi who carried forward his principles, later known for the Buddhan, land gift, movement. Merged Hindu spirituality with social activism, walking across India to encourage land redistribution. Sarojini Naidu. Poet, freedom fighter, and leader who often wove Hindu imagery into her speeches about freedom. Served as the first female president of the Indian National Congress. Annie Besant. Although British by birth, she became a key advocate for Indian self-rule. As a theosophist, she embraced and promoted Hindu philosophical ideas, giving them an international audience. 4. Hindu imagery in nationalist culture. Bharat Mata as a unifying symbol. Depicted as a goddess draped in saffron, holding a flag, and sometimes surrounded by lions. Inspired both devotion and patriotism, though its overtly Hindu character sometimes sparked concern among non-Hindus. Epic narratives as political allegories. The Ramayana and Mahabharata were frequently invoked to frame the independence struggle as a battle between righteousness and tyranny. Leaders were likened to mythic heroes, and the British to demon kings or unjust rulers. 5. The rise of Hindu nationalist organizations. Hindu Mahasabha. Founded in 1915, aimed to protect Hindu interests and promote Hindu unity. Opposed both British rule and certain Congress policies it saw as overly conciliatory to Muslims. Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, RSS. Established in 1925 by K.B. Hedgewar. Focused on discipline, physical training, and cultural revival among Hindus. Avoided direct participation in the Congress-led independence movement but promoted Hindu solidarity as a long-term goal. 6. Mounting religious tensions. Political fracturing. The push for independence became complicated by debates over the future political structure of India. Muslim leaders, most notably the Muslim League under Muhammad Ali Jinnah, increasingly advocated for a separate state for Muslims. Communal riots. Incidents of Hindu-Muslim violence became more frequent in the 1930s and 1940s. The British colonial policy of divide and rule deepened mistrust between communities. 7. The road to partition. The two-nation theory. Advocated by the Muslim League, it argued that Hindus and Muslims were distinct nations with irreconcilable differences. Opposed by Gandhi and Nehru, who envisioned a secular India. 1940 Lahore Resolution. The Muslim League formally called for independent Muslim-majority states. Hindu leaders feared the fragmentation of the subcontinent and the loss of access to historic holy sites in Punjab and Bengal. 8. Hindu responses to the partition debate. Religious concerns. The proposed division threatened to separate millions of Hindus from sacred temples and pilgrimage routes. Hindu refugees in potential Pakistan territories began to migrate preemptively. Cultural anxiety. Leaders feared that centuries-old Hindu-Muslim coexistence would be irreparably damaged. Calls for protecting Hindu minorities in Muslim-majority areas grew more urgent. 9. Independence and partition, 1947. August 15, 1947. India gained independence from Britain. The subcontinent was divided into India, majority Hindu but officially secular, and Pakistan, created as a Muslim homeland. The human tragedy. One of the largest mass migrations in history, around 14 million people were displaced. Widespread violence left hundreds of thousands dead. Hindu and Sikh refugees fled from Pakistan to India, while Muslims migrated in the opposite direction. 10. Gandhi's final struggle. Peace missions. Gandhi spent his last months traveling to riot-hit areas, fasting and appealing for communal harmony. His vision of a united India stood in stark contrast to the reality of partition violence. Assassination. On January 30, 1948, Gandhi was assassinated by Nathuram Godse, a Hindu nationalist who accused him of being too conciliatory toward Muslims. His death marked both the end of an era and a deep wound in the moral conscience of the nation. 11. Hinduism in the immediate aftermath of partition. Refugee resettlement became a massive undertaking, with temples and ashrams often serving as shelters. Many Hindu religious leaders urged forgiveness and healing, though some also pushed for stronger political representation for Hindus. Partition left deep scars in Hindu-Muslim relations that persist in various forms to this day. 12. Legacy of the independence era for Hinduism. Hinduism entered the modern Indian Republic as the majority faith but within a secular constitutional framework. The nationalist period had reshaped Hindu identity, emphasizing unity, social reform, and engagement with the modern world. Many organizations born during this period continue to influence cultural and political life. Part 18. Hinduism in Post-Independence India, Modernization, Migration, and Cultural Transformation. The partition of 1947 had shaken India's social and cultural foundations. For Hinduism, the first decades of independence were years of rebuilding, redefining, and adapting. While the trauma of partition left deep scars, the establishment of the Republic of India in 1950 also created unprecedented opportunities for Hindus to reimagine their role in a democratic, secular nation. This period from the late 1940s to the 1970s saw Hinduism simultaneously anchored in tradition and engaged with rapid modernization. It was a time when rural temple bells mingled with the hum of newly installed factories, when ancient rituals were broadcast on radio for the first time, and when millions of Hindus migrated, both within India and abroad, carrying their traditions to new lands. 1. India's secular constitution and Hinduism's place. A new legal landscape. The Constitution of India came into force on January 26, 1950. Declared India a secular republic, meaning no official state religion. Guaranteed freedom of religion while prohibiting discrimination based on religion. Implications for Hindus. Hinduism was recognized not as a political identity but as a cultural and spiritual tradition coexisting alongside other faiths. The government sought to ensure that Hindu religious institutions remained free to function, but also to prevent political domination by any one religion. 2. The Nehruvian vision. Jawaharlal Nehru's modernist approach. India's first Prime Minister, Nehru, emphasized scientific temper and modernization. Personally agnostic, he nevertheless valued Hinduism as a civilizational heritage. Under his leadership, the state invested in education, industry, and infrastructure developments that would inevitably influence Hindu society. Tensions between tradition and reform. Rapid industrialization and urbanization began eroding traditional village life. Yet many Hindu festivals and rituals found new expressions in cities, often with greater scale and public participation. 3. The Hindu Code Bills and Legal Reform. B.R. Ambedkar's role. Architect of the Constitution and a former Hindu who embraced Buddhism to protest caste discrimination. Championed reform of Hindu personal laws to grant women equal rights in inheritance, marriage, and divorce. The Hindu Code Bills. Passed in the 1950s, they modernized Hindu family law. Extended legal equality to women in areas that had long been governed by patriarchal customs. While welcomed by reformists, some orthodox groups protested, fearing erosion of traditional structures. 4. Hinduism and caste in the early republic. Abolition of untouchability. Article 17 of the Constitution outlawed untouchability. Despite legal changes, caste discrimination persisted, particularly in rural areas. Reservation policies. Scheduled castes and scheduled tribes were granted affirmative action in education, jobs, and politics. Some Hindu upper caste groups resisted these policies, while others supported them as necessary for social justice. 5. Pilgrimage and religious revival. Temples in a new era. Major shrines like Tirupati, Kashi Vishwanath, and Jagannath Puri experienced surges in visitors, boosted by better transport infrastructure. Government tourism boards began promoting pilgrimage routes, blending religious and economic goals. Religious broadcasting. All India Radio occasionally aired devotional music and discourses. The first televised coverage of Hindu festivals, including Ram Leela performances, began in urban centers. 6. The role of ascetics and spiritual teachers. Continuing influence of gurus. Figures like Anandamayi Ma, Swami Sivananda, and Neem Karoli Baba gained large followings. Spiritual leaders adapted their teachings to modern life, addressing urban stress, political upheavals, and youth disillusionment. Ashram expansion. Many ashrams modernized their facilities, hosting not just pilgrims but students, foreign visitors, and seekers of yoga. 7. Migration and the Hindu diaspora. Within India, partition refugees, especially Hindus from Pakistan, settled in Delhi, Punjab, and other northern states. Internal migration from villages to industrial cities brought diverse regional traditions into contact, leading to cultural blending. Overseas migration. The 1950s, 1970s saw Hindus moving to East Africa, the UK, the Caribbean, and Southeast Asia for work and education. Diaspora communities established temples abroad, often blending architectural elements from different regions of India. 8. Hinduism in international awareness. Early cultural diplomacy. Indian leaders promoted yoga, classical dance, and philosophy abroad as part of soft power diplomacy. Hinduism became associated with peace, nonviolence, and spirituality in the global imagination. Western seekers. Figures like Allen Ginsberg, the Beatles, later in the 1960s, and many intellectuals became interested in Hindu philosophy, foreshadowing the cultural exchanges of the later decades. 9. Hinduism in popular culture. Cinema. Mythological films, often retelling episodes from the Ramayana or Mahabharata, remained popular. Bollywood began blending Hindu religious motifs with modern romantic or patriotic narratives. Music. Bhajans and devotional songs found a place on radio alongside film music. Classical music maestros incorporated spiritual themes into concerts attended by secular and religious audiences alike. 10. Social movements inspired by Hinduism. Environmental awareness. In rural areas, local Hindu traditions of tree worship and river veneration played a role in emerging environmental activism. Temples sometimes led efforts to preserve sacred groves and water bodies. Village development. Gandhian ashrams worked on rural education and sanitation while blending Hindu ethical principles with modern development goals. 11. Political engagement of Hindu organizations. RSS and Jana Sangh. The Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh continued its grassroots organizing, while the Bharatiya Jana Sangh, founded in 1951, began contesting elections. Both promoted a vision of cultural nationalism rooted in Hindu heritage, though still on the margins of mainstream politics. 12. Regional expressions of Hinduism. South India. Temple festivals in Tamil Nadu and Kerala retained deep local flavor, with elaborate rituals and artistic performances. Efforts to preserve Dravidian temple architecture gained momentum. Eastern India. Durga Puja in Bengal evolved into a massive cultural celebration with artistic installations, music, and theater. Odisha promoted Jagannath culture as a symbol of regional pride. 13. Economic changes and temple management. State involvement. Several state governments brought major temples under public trust boards to ensure transparency in finances and pilgrim services. Critics saw this as overreach into religious affairs. Charitable functions. Many temples expanded into running schools, hospitals, and orphanages. 14. Hinduism and science. Bridging tradition and modernity. Public intellectuals debated how Hindu cosmology could coexist with scientific education. Concepts like karma and ahimsa were reframed in terms of ethics and humanism rather than metaphysics alone. 15. Gender and religious life. Women as temple leaders. Post-independence reforms opened opportunities for women to lead bhajan mandalas, devotional singing groups, and manage small shrines. Hindu women in urban areas increasingly balanced professional work with religious participation. 16. Education and religious studies. Inclusion of Hindu thought. Universities established departments for Sanskrit, philosophy, and comparative religion. Hindu texts were studied both for their literary merit and as sources of cultural identity. 17. National integration through religion. Shared holidays. Republic Day and Independence Day celebrations often included Hindu prayers alongside readings from other faiths. National leaders used religious festivals as opportunities to promote unity. 18. Challenges of the period. Lingering caste discrimination. Despite constitutional protections, many Dalits still faced exclusion from temples and religious gatherings. Reform movements pushed for greater inclusivity in religious spaces. Communal tensions. Occasional Hindu-Muslim clashes reminded the young republic of the fragile peace after partition. 19. Seeds of future movements. Revivalist currents. The groundwork was being laid for more assertive Hindu political movements in the coming decades. Cultural pride movements began focusing on reclaiming temple sites and promoting Sanskrit learning. 20. Conclusion. A religion in transition. By the 1970s, Hinduism in India was a living paradox, deeply rooted in ancient traditions yet adapting rapidly to modern life. Urbanization, education, and migration were reshaping the way Hindus practiced their faith. Gurus were traveling abroad, temples were opening in London and Nairobi, and television was beginning to bring rituals into living rooms. The next phase would see Hinduism become both a domestic cultural anchor and a global export, setting the stage for the transformations of the late 20th century. Part 19. Hinduism in the late 20th century. Globalization, political resurgence, and cultural shifts. From the mid-1970s to the close of the 20th century, Hinduism entered a new phase of its long history, one marked by global awareness, the emergence of mass media as a religious platform, renewed political mobilization, and a more visible Hindu presence on the world stage. This was the era when India transformed from a primarily inward-looking post-colonial nation into a participant in an increasingly interconnected global economy, and Hinduism traveled with it. It was also a time when old religious rhythms, temple bells, Vedic chants, village fairs, now mingled with the sounds of televisions broadcasting religious dramas, cassette players playing devotional music, and political rallies where Hindu imagery was prominently displayed. 1. A new global landscape. The Indian diaspora expands. In the 1970s and 1980s, changes in immigration policies in countries like the United States, Canada, the UK, and Australia allowed more skilled Indian migrants, many of them Hindu, to settle abroad. These migrants built temples in cities where Hindu worship had never been publicly visible before, from small converted houses to architecturally elaborate shrines replicating South Indian or North Indian temple styles. Overseas Hindu communities became important cultural ambassadors, hosting festivals such as Diwali in public spaces and inviting local non-Hindu neighbors. Flow of ideas and spiritual teachers. Hindu gurus gained international recognition, often through tours and lecture circuits in the West. Figures like Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, Swami Prabhupada, founder of ISKCON, Satya Sai Baba, and Swami Chinmayananda attracted both Indian and non-Indian disciples. The Beatles' association with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi in the late 1960s had already opened the door for Western curiosity. The following decades expanded it into sustained communities of followers. 2. The rise of global Hindu movements. ISKCON, International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Founded in 1966 in New York, ISKCON grew rapidly during the 1970s and 1980s. The movement's focus on bhakti, devotion, to Krishna, its distinctive music and dress, and its practice of public chanting, Harinam Sankirtan, made it one of the most recognizable expressions of Hinduism abroad. Temples and farms were established across North America, Europe, and beyond. Transcendental meditation. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's Transcendental Meditation program promised mental clarity, stress relief, and personal growth, appealing to a global audience. By the late 20th century, TM was being studied scientifically for its health benefits, bringing Hindu meditative techniques into secular contexts. 3. Mass media and religious communication. Television revolution. In India, television ownership surged in the 1980s with the expansion of Doordarshan, the state broadcaster. Epic TV serials like Ramayan, 1987 to 1988, and Mahabharat, 1988 to 1990, captivated audiences nationwide, sometimes bringing entire towns to a halt during broadcast hours. These dramatizations not only retold Hindu scripture but also deepened the visual and emotional attachment to the epics. Cassette culture. Cheap audio cassettes spread devotional songs, bhajans, and discourses to millions. Singers like Anup Jalota and Hari Om Sharan became household names for their devotional recordings. 4. Hinduism and political resurgence. The emergency and aftermath. India's emergency period, 1975 to 1977, declared by Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, curtailed political freedoms and disrupted many grassroots movements. After the emergency, political organizations with Hindu nationalist leanings gained momentum, positioning themselves as defenders of cultural identity. The rise of the BJP. The Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP, founded in 1980 as the successor to the Jana Sangh, positioned itself as a proponent of Hindu cultural pride. While initially marginal in national politics, the BJP began to build a base through local mobilizations, particularly around religious issues. 5. Ayodhya Movement. Ram Janmabhoomi Campaign. Centered on the claim that the Babri Masjid in Ayodhya was built over the birthplace of Lord Rama. Gained national attention in the late 1980s through mass rallies, religious processions, Rath Yatras, and media coverage. Culminated in the demolition of the Babri Masjid in 1992, triggering nationwide communal violence. The event marked a turning point, intertwining Hindu religious sentiment with political action in an unprecedented way in independent India. 6. Social reform currents within Hinduism. Caste and inclusion efforts. Reformist Hindu leaders and organizations continued advocating for the elimination of caste-based discrimination. Some temples began allowing entry to Dalits and other marginalized groups, although resistance remained in certain regions. Women's religious leadership. Women played larger roles in temple administration, spiritual teaching, and religious scholarship. Figures like Mata Amritnandami, Amma, rose to prominence, drawing global devotees. 7. Hinduism in the Indian economy's transformation. Economic liberalization. The 1991 economic reforms opened India to global trade and investment. Rising incomes for parts of the middle class allowed more domestic tourism and pilgrimage. Temples became not just spiritual centers but also hubs for regional economies. 8. Cultural renaissance through festivals. Urban Diwali and Holi. Festivals became grander in cities, with elaborate light displays, concerts, and televised coverage. Bollywood often synchronized film releases with major Hindu festivals, reinforcing their cultural centrality. Kumbh Mela on the world stage. The Kumbh Mela attracted increasing numbers of foreign visitors and journalists, turning it into both a devotional and cultural showcase. 9. The global yoga boom. Yoga as India's cultural export. By the 1980s and 1990s, yoga was being taught in gyms, universities, and retreat centers worldwide. While often presented in secular terms, yoga's philosophical roots in Hinduism were still acknowledged by many teachers and practitioners. 10. Hinduism and technology. Early internet communities. The 1990s saw the first Hindu discussion groups on email lists and early websites. Digital archives of scriptures and online satsangs began appearing, laying the foundation for 21st century digital Hinduism. 11. Environmental and cultural heritage protection. Sacred ecology. Hindu environmental movements gained momentum, advocating for the cleaning of the Ganga and preservation of sacred groves. Temples began incorporating eco-friendly practices into festivals. 12. Interfaith dialogue and global image. Hindu voices in international forums. Indian spiritual leaders participated in global interfaith gatherings, promoting messages of nonviolence, ahimsa, and universal brotherhood, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. This strengthened Hinduism's image as a philosophy of tolerance and spirituality. 13. The diaspora's second generation. Identity in a global context. Children of Hindu immigrants in the West began balancing modern Western lifestyles with Hindu traditions. Weekend schools for Sanskrit and Hindu culture emerged in diaspora communities to maintain linguistic and cultural continuity. 14. Challenges of the period. Communal polarization. The 1980s and 1990s saw increasing religious polarization, with Hindu-Muslim tensions often becoming flashpoints for political mobilization. Many Hindu leaders emphasized that such conflicts were distortions of the faith's teachings. 15. Pop culture fusion. Bollywood and Hindu symbolism. Films integrated mythological references into modern narratives, sometimes allegorizing political issues through religious metaphors. Music and Bhakti pop. The devotional genre expanded into commercial albums with modern arrangements, appealing to urban youth. 16. Academic and scholarly growth. Hindu studies abroad. Western universities developed robust Hindu studies programs. Scholars debated the representation of Hinduism in academic literature, sparking discussions about authenticity and interpretation. 17. Major Hindu institutions expand. Akhil Bharatiya Akara Parishad continued organizing large gatherings at the Kumbh Mela, reinforcing traditional monastic orders' influence. Modern spiritual organizations. Art of Living, founded by Sri Sri Ravi Shankar in 1981, began offering programs blending meditation, yoga, and service. 18. Key turning points before the millennium. The globalization of yoga and meditation. The politicization of Hindu imagery in electoral politics. The spread of Hindu communities across 5 continents. The unprecedented use of mass media to broadcast religious narratives. 19. Conclusion. A complex legacy. By the end of the 1990s, Hinduism had become both more visible and more contested, at home and abroad. Its philosophical ideas were influencing wellness culture worldwide. Its political dimensions were increasingly prominent in Indian public life. And yet, in villages and small towns, the same age-old practices continued: the morning arti, the chanting of mantras, the gathering for seasonal fairs. The stage was set for the 21st century, where Hinduism would navigate digital transformation, globalization, and a rapidly shifting social fabric, without losing sight of the sacred rivers, temples, and scriptures that had anchored it for millennia. Part 20. Hinduism in the 21st Century, Continuity, Change, and Global Presence. When the clock turned to the year 2000, Hinduism entered not just a new century but also a new era of communication, technology, and globalization. The changes that had been building throughout the late 20th century, global migration, political mobilization, and media-driven religious engagement, now unfolded on an even larger stage. Hinduism became more interconnected, more visible, and in some ways more self-reflective than ever before. And yet, through all the changes, it continued to sustain its deep link to the ancient traditions, philosophies, and sacred geographies that have shaped it for over 3 millennia. This final part of the series will explore the contemporary landscape of Hinduism, its modern expressions, its challenges, its global presence, and its enduring role as both a living faith and a cultural force. 1. The digital age and the rise of online Hinduism. Temples go digital. In the 2000s and 2010s, major temples across India, from Tirupati in Andhra Pradesh to Somnath in Gujarat, began live streaming rituals for devotees unable to attend in person. Websites allowed devotees to book darshan appointments, order prasad deliveries, and make online donations. The COVID-19 pandemic accelerated this trend in the 2020s, with virtual temple tours, Zoom satsangs, and YouTube channels dedicated to puja rituals. Social media and Hindu identity. Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter became spaces where Hindu festivals, philosophies, and social debates were shared widely. Spiritual influencers and temple accounts use short videos to teach mantras, explain epic stories, and show behind-the-scenes preparations for rituals. Hashtags like #Diwali, #Ganesha, and #Yoga connected millions of people across the globe. 2. The globalization of yoga and meditation. International Day of Yoga. In 2014, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi proposed the idea of an International Day of Yoga to the United Nations. It was adopted unanimously, with the first celebration held on June 21, 2015, in cities worldwide. Events often feature massive public yoga sessions, sometimes attended by thousands. Yoga as cultural diplomacy. While modern yoga often blends physical exercise with mindfulness, many teachers continue to reference its Hindu philosophical roots in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, Bhagavad Gita, and Upanishads. This global embrace of yoga has been one of the most successful cultural exports of Hindu tradition. 3. Hinduism and Indian politics in the 21st century. The political mainstream. Hindu nationalism, once peripheral, has become a major political force in India, with the Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP, winning national elections in 2014 and 2019. Political rallies, speeches, and policy discussions sometimes integrate Hindu imagery, temple inaugurations, and religious slogans. Ram Mandir in Ayodhya. The decades-long Ram Janmabhoomi dispute culminated in a Supreme Court verdict in 2019, awarding the site to a trust for temple construction. The groundbreaking ceremony in 2020 was televised nationally, symbolizing both political power and religious devotion. 4. Environmentalism and sacred geography. The Ganga and Yamuna. Movements to clean India's sacred rivers have blended ecological science with Hindu devotional language. Organizations like the Ganga Action Parivar promote environmental stewardship framed as a form of dharma. Pilgrimage trails. Traditional pilgrimages such as the Char Dham Yatra, Badrinath, Kedarnath, Gangotri, Yamunotri, and the Amarnath Yatra have modern infrastructure support, making them more accessible to domestic and international pilgrims. 5. Expanding the Hindu diaspora's influence. Temples as cultural centers. In the United States, UK, Canada, Australia, and other countries, temples serve as hubs for language classes, classical dance lessons, and youth leadership programs. The Swaminarayan Akshardham temples in Delhi and New Jersey, and the massive BAPS Mandir in London, are examples of modern architectural marvels built by global Hindu communities. Interfaith outreach. Diaspora Hindu leaders increasingly participate in interfaith panels, peace summits, and community service collaborations. 6. The role of women in modern Hinduism. Spiritual leadership. Women such as Mata Amritnandami, Amma, Anandamurti Guruma, and Sadhvi Ritambara attract large followings. Women also lead temple boards, academic departments, and community organizations. Feminist readings of scripture. Modern scholars and activists are reinterpreting Hindu texts through feminist perspectives, re-examining the roles of Draupadi, Sita, and other epic heroines. 7. Hinduism and popular culture. Bollywood and beyond. Films like Bahubali, RRR, and Tumbad use Hindu mythology as inspiration for large-scale storytelling. Global streaming platforms have made Indian mythological dramas accessible to viewers worldwide. Music and devotion. Contemporary devotional music fuses traditional bhajans with electronic beats and fusion genres, appealing to younger audiences. 8. Technology meets tradition. Hindu apps. Apps like Hindu Calendar, Gita AI, and Virtual Puja allow users to access scriptures, festival dates, and guided prayers on their phones. Digital astrology consultations are now widely available. AI in religious education. Artificial intelligence tools are being developed to answer questions about Hindu scriptures and recommend readings or practices. 9. Hinduism and social reform in the modern era. Caste awareness. While caste remains a sensitive issue, both urban and diaspora Hindu communities are increasingly vocal about promoting equality. Many temple boards abroad actively include members from all backgrounds. Inclusivity movements. LGBTQ+ acceptance within Hinduism is a growing conversation, with some temples in the West openly blessing same-sex unions. 10. The return of pilgrimage. Megafestivals. The Kumbh Mela in Prayagraj drew over 200 million visitors in 2019, making it the largest peaceful gathering in human history. Drone footage, mobile apps, and live streams brought the event to global audiences. 11. Hinduism in crisis and resilience. COVID-19 pandemic. Lockdowns closed temples temporarily, but also sparked innovation in digital worship. Religious charities distributed food and medical supplies, emphasizing seva, selfless service, as a core value. 12. Controversies and cultural debates. Appropriation versus appreciation. The popularity of yoga, meditation, and Hindu symbols abroad has sparked debates about whether these traditions are being respected or commodified. Hindu scholars and community leaders often emphasize education and acknowledgement of origins. 13. Academic engagement and representation. Hindu studies in universities. Departments in global universities now offer extensive courses on Hindu philosophy, history, and arts. Diaspora scholars play a major role in shaping academic discourse. 14. Festivals on a global stage. Diwali is a public holiday. Countries like Fiji, Trinidad and Tobago, and Mauritius have long recognized Diwali officially. In 2023, New York City declared Diwali a public school holiday, reflecting Hinduism's growing visibility abroad. 15. Media personalities and spiritual branding. Global gurus. Figures like Sadhguru Jaggi Vasudev and Sri Sri Ravi Shankar use podcasts, social media, and massive international events to promote Hindu teachings on inner peace, environmentalism, and social responsibility. 16. Hindu philanthropy. Relief work. Hindu charitable organizations, such as the Ramakrishna Mission and ISKCON Food Relief, serve millions of free meals annually. Diaspora Hindu philanthropists fund hospitals, schools, and heritage conservation projects. 17. Challenges of the modern era. Balancing tradition and modernity. Younger generations sometimes struggle to connect with traditional rituals, prompting community leaders to adapt presentations while preserving authenticity. Urban lifestyles and time constraints have reduced participation in long temple ceremonies. 18. The continuing role of philosophy. Neo-Vedanta and modern thought. Thinkers continue to reinterpret Vedantic philosophy for the modern seeker, emphasizing self-realization, ethical living, and unity of existence. Translations and commentaries on the Gita, Upanishads, and Yoga Sutras are widely available in multiple languages. 19. Hinduism's future directions. Sustainability. Integration of Hindu ecological principles with global climate action movements. Promotion of vegetarianism and plant-based diets as both spiritual and environmental choices. Global Hindu networks. Collaborative diaspora organizations that support temple construction, cultural education, and interfaith diplomacy. 20. Conclusion, an eternal flow. In the 21st century, Hinduism stands as both one of the oldest and one of the most adaptable spiritual traditions on earth. It flows through the ancient temple corridors of Tamil Nadu, the Himalayan pilgrimage routes, the suburban temples of California, and the yoga studios of Berlin. It exists in the chants of priests, the songs of children learning Sanskrit abroad, the quiet meditations of urban professionals, and the public celebrations of millions during Diwali. What binds it together is its remarkable capacity to absorb change while remaining rooted in the eternal, the Sanatana Dharma, the timeless way. As Hinduism moves into the decades ahead, it carries not only its history but also the ability to shape the spiritual imagination of a globalized, interconnected world. With that, we've come to the end of our journey through the history of Hinduism. Before you go, please leave a comment telling me what you'd like to see next in a future episode. Don't forget to subscribe, and have a great night.